Do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes. When are they, you might ask? April 27th and 28th, an advanced class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. May 18th and 19th, a standalone EFI Level 1 class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info. Tonight, our special guest is an NHRA Funnycar driver. He holds the NHRA record for the fastest Funnycar run ever recorded at 3.912 seconds and 323.43 miles an hour. He has 22 career wins, 2 world championships, and has been licensed in 12 different NHRA categories. He's a former sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, a cancer survivor, and the driver of the Infinite Hero Funnycar. He's not just fast, he's the one and only Fast Jack Beckman. And as usual, we have our normal panel of hosts. Bill Fowler of Big Hat Racing. Brian Barnhill of TunerTools.com. James Short of Shore Tuning. John Bewley of Little John's Motorsport Solutions. Mark Dalquist of Throttles Performance. Scott Clark of RealTuners.com. Scott Evans of Helix Tuning. Tom Sewell of Fuel Injector Development. Dan Parker, the movie star. He's blind in one eye and can't see out the other. And possibly a few of our previous guest hosts will pop their heads in and chat as well. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Now let's get this show on the road. Welcome back to another episode of RealTuners, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. As you hear, Jack Beckman is here with us tonight. We're going to have a great time talking to this guy. He is awesome. He is so friendly to talk to. I got to talk to him a little bit a couple weekends ago at the local drag race here. NHRA came to town at 4 Wide. It was amazing to watch. And I can't say enough about how good of a person he was just talking to him there in person at the races. Without further ado, I'm just going to bring everybody in, have everybody say hello, and we'll get this show on the road.
Greetings, everyone. How's it going?
Hey, everybody.
How's it going?
And
So,
good evening.
yes, welcome, everybody. So, Clark here. Just real quick, before we get into our discussion with tonight's guest, couple things to cover. Some upcoming classes. We haven't updated all the advertisements in the intro bumper. So I just want to run through this, everybody, real quick. May 4th and 5th, Shore Tuning, Danville, Kentucky. I got a standalone EFI clinic level 1. That's for all you Haltech, Hawley, Mega Squirts, Fuel Tech, any other insert standalone here users. That's a good place to go. That's a James Short shop. Going to be a lot of dyno tuning and a good time there. 2-day class. Check it out at RealTuners.com. May 18th and 19th, 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri is going to be our basics class as well. Another 2-day deal. That's going to be Hawley specific. Okay. Highly recommend checking that shop out. Blake Hughes, 417 Motorsports, partner of John Bewley's and mine, and always a great place to do classes. June 1st and 2nd, a level 1 class at 4-Door Horsepower Club, Justin White shop in Slidell, Louisiana. That's your New Orleans area. Another level 1 standalone class. We are looking for cars and customers for that one. Also, let me cover the level 2 classes we got coming up. April 27th and 28th, which is a little over a week from now. That one's got, last I checked, we have 4 seats left for that class. That's a Blake Hughes' shop in 417 Motorsports out in the middle of nowhere, Springfield, Missouri, but he seems to draw a crowd. Definitely come check that one out. That's level 2. That's going to be advanced Hawley. We are going to have Stephanie and Mo Loans from LSX Killer. Their dyno is going to be there for both days. We are not going to screw around with much presentation. We're going to get into the hardcore detailed stuff. Evans is going to give some remote presentation for us in the morning. And then we're going to be tuning on cars on the dyno. I think I got 5 or 6 cars lined up for that one. Literally, it's going to be tuning, advanced stuff, nonstop drivability, wide open throttle, making power safely, and some advanced functions on the Hawley ECU. And then also that same class, only covering all brands of standalones, June 15th and 16th at Endless Performance in Milwaukee again. We were just up there last weekend, and I just wanted to give a quick shout out to all the guys that showed up to that class. That was a super cool class, perfect size, loved it. Thank you guys for coming out. Huge thanks to my buddies, Matt Haney, Derek Tom, and Wade Delorier. Those guys, they brought Wade's car up there. We had we had an interesting car on the dyno. I thought it was really cool. Wade brought his car up there. It's I'll say this, it makes almost 8 horsepower per cubic inch at the flywheel, and it's a streetable car. So yeah, it's a 120 cubic inch Mitsubishi 4-cylinder all-wheel drive car that was laying down a comfortable 800 wheel horsepower. And if it were not for some cam timing stuff and running out of ignition, I'm pretty sure it would have crested 950. But anyway, we'll bring that one back and get that guy sorted out. But that was a lot of fun to watch. It was really cool to show some of the guys something other than the usual Turbo LS. And the guys got it. It was really cool. Anyway, it was fun to see because that was a car that he had, individual O2s, O2 per cylinder, all the goodies, all the data logging toys, everything on there that really helps you sort that thing out. That car is about ready to crack into the 8s in the quarter mile. And it's a streetable car, street legal car. So anyway, really cool rig. Really cool. Thank you guys, Wade and Matt and Derek, for bringing that car up from Minneapolis for us. That was super cool. Now, without further ado, and I got to shout out to Scott Evans and Bill Fowler for scoring this next guest for us. Cause this is one of the bigger guys. We've had Loans on here and he announces for guys. I've heard him scream Fast Jack Beckman 300 times already this season. But welcome, Jack Beckman, for joining us tonight. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for coming on. How are you doing tonight, man? Everything okay out there?
I wasn't quite sure what the podcast was going to be about and what we're going to talk about. And I'm a drag race guy and I'm a nitro guy, but I'm listening to you talk about the fuel ejection deal. And I'm sitting in my garage and my first car is right behind me. It's a 68 SS396 El Camino. When I say first car, my dad bought it in 1979 from the original owner. I bought it in 81 from my dad before I was even old enough to take my driving test. And I took my driving test on my 16th birthday in the car. But anyway, it had been sitting for 22 years. And what kind of started the whole rebuild is I was talking to my buddies at MSD and got one of their atomic fuel injection kits. So I kind of just built the car around fuel injection. And I've always been a carburetor guy before I switched to nitromethane. I am loving having a handheld controller instead of taking float bowls off. And not that I didn't love all the things that I did with the carburetor, but this fuel injection is absolutely amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Has it run yet? You got that thing fired up?
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew we were close because I was looking on your page and following around and I saw you had, you were rolling it around, getting it ready to go for a car show.
Yeah, I took it to the alignment place, and from there straight to the air conditioning shop. It's got a whole vintage air kit in it, and from there I was a good boy and I brought it straight home. But this Saturday they're doing that cool cruise right by Pomona Drag Strip, and my buddy Craig Hosell, he used to run Force's whole merchandise store. He had called me like 2 weeks before the car was done, and apparently he had more optimism than I did that the car would be ready. He said, "I want you to bring it and debut it here." So Saturday's the day.
Awesome. Outstanding.
And I have to
You're
say,
without passionate about cars. Yeah, I mean, that's
without your own little own Bill Fowler, I would not have had this thing running since, because Bill helped me sort out, put bare brakes, 4-wheel disc all the way around. And I only had about 60 tech phone calls to Bill to make sure I was doing everything correct.
Does this have
awesome?
Does this have Hawley EFI on it, Jack?
It's an MSD Atomic. Yeah.
The Atomic. Okay.
It's got the Hawley fuel tank and pump and the MSD Atomic system.
I got you. I love the license plates.
Yeah, well, if you look real closely, the last registration was 1992. So we're going to fix that in the next couple of days.
That's awesome.
Wow.
You got some back taxes to pay on that one, I bet.
Well, I went down to Auto Club to insure it and renew my registration. And, the way California DMV rolls is if you renew it one day early, they charge you the other 365 days. So I got a one-day trip slip from Auto Club. So hopefully, it's not like it stands out. It's got 3-inch Flowmaster exhaust all the way out the back. It's got a comp cams roller cam in it. It's ridiculously loud and it's painted yellow, but hopefully I don't get pulled over.
Perfect. No, let me explain this for the people who are not from California. In California, you don't go to the DMV, right? You join Auto Club, okay, the AAA, and they go to the DMV for you. It's the coolest thing ever because the crowd in California, if you try to go to the DMV yourself, it's horrible. Yeah,
I had to make an appointment for the Real ID. You know how they want all of us to phase our driver's licenses over to something that's less tamper-proof. So it's a 2-month wait for the appointment, and they're backed up 4 months right now. I can't wait to go in there and twiddle my thumbs around for a couple hours.
Right. Yeah, as many of you folks will know, we're getting a new set of IDs. This is a national rollout, but it varies by state because it's also part of the security infrastructure for when you get on airplanes. And so if you fly for work or for fun or anything else, eventually you're going to have to deal with this. So
yeah, you don't need to show it when you vote, but by God, you got to have a foolproof one to get on an airplane, right? Wait a minute. Did I just go there? Did I?
Right? Yes.
You just offended Brian Barnhill. He's our resident liberal.
Oh, no. I grew up in Texas. What are you thinking?
I was joking because I knew that would get you all bent out of shape. Oh, my gosh. All right, man. I got questions that I want to get off and answered. And I'm just going to get right to it. So we are EFI guys, right? And mostly gasoline, alcohol. I've done a little bit of nitromethane with EFI on some Brazilian stuff. The guys in Brazil will run 4 and 5 injectors per cylinder and run nitromethane on all motor stuff. I've been around John Beck's program. These guys race at, they have a Highboy Roadster that literally still has Henry Ford 10. And the thing's been over 300 miles an hour on the salt. And they are, there was ex-Worsham family engines that they were using. So I've been around a little bit of blown nitromethane stuff. And I know they detune that thing to about 30% of its power. And it still makes 3,000 horsepower. So, everybody on here, we and all of our listeners have certainly all read the, they make 10,000 horsepower. They burn the spark plugs off 3/4 of the way down the track. Forget all that stuff. I got some questions. If you can answer them, cool. If you can't, for whatever reason, fine. But hey,
wait a minute. Now. I just want to put this. You said, wait a minute, I'm going to get right to my questions. And what are we, about an hour and a half, and we're waiting for the first one. So go ahead.
Right. Well, I'm trying to give the background there, but everybody wants to know about nitromethane cars. I know that they have to run a ton more timing than people expect, even with boost. So, can you tell us what the typical, ignition timing and how much boost are you guys running on these things by the time you get to the big end? That's my first question. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, we'll start with ignition timing. Typical Funnycar, and this would also apply to top fuel dragsters. And keep in mind, each tuner is going to have slightly different preferences. But let's say you're going to start with 52 degrees of timing. When I step down on the throttle, there's a switch under the throttle. That switch controls all of our timers for ignition management, for fuel management, and for clutch management. So let's stick with ignition management. We'll run that 52 degrees out just past the Christmas tree. And this entire time, the clutch is only seeing 6 of the 18 levers. The throw-out bearing is holding the rest of them out of the place. The racetrack cannot handle the power that we're making there. So we are slipping the clutch. We are wearing the clutch. And even at that point, we're going to go out and smoke the tires. Somehow we've got to let that tire go from twisted up and distorted to back to round. So we'll pull about 18 degrees of timing out of it. So you'll see the timing come right down, and then we will ramp it back in. And at the finish line, If you don't hit the rev limiter, you'll typically see the things, and again, it's crew chief specific, somewhere between 50 degrees and 55 degrees. But what happens is the way they've curtailed a lot of the top end speeds, they started this with dragsters in earnest about 10 years ago, is they ramp out ignition timing. Our rev limiters are not like Pro Stock where they physically limit ignition pulses. All ours do is ramp timing out at a pre-described rate once the engine reaches a certain RPM there. So that's how we do timing management.
So you're using points boxes, right? that actually fire your magnetos? No.
We got away from points boxes 20 years ago. In one of the nostalgia classes, Nostalgia Dragster and Funnycar actually run with a completely different set of rules. One gets more boost, one gets a better ignition, one still has to run a points box. It makes no sense. They just burn out. Ours are all MSD 44 amp ignition systems with a power grid to program the timing on it. Everything is electronic. And technically ours aren't even magnetos anymore. They're generators because they're rare earth magnets. And literally the magnets are so strong in those that if I handed you one of our magnetos out of the engine, it would be all you can do. And you would have to have a pretty serious grip to turn that thing past the magnet.
Wow.
So is it based on a standard Pro Mag 44? I mean, I use a bunch of those on blown Pro Mods, right? But
that is our only available generator is the Pro Mag 44. Correct.
Now, is something physically rotating that, or how much timing? I mean, you only have like a 20 or 25 degree timing window to adjust those things, right? Unless there's something else modified.
That's correct. And that's really all we need, because let's say at a high, you're going to be, I would say a real aggressive timing would probably be 57 degrees, and you're never going to want it to go below about 32, even when you're parking the timing to get the ignition to settle. Now, the other time that we would want to pull timing out of the car is what we call pedal feature. And I mean that if the car goes out there and smokes the tires and you've got to pedal it, in other words, come off the throttle and back on the throttle. If you come off that switch under the throttle pedal, you can program how much timing you want to take out of the car. And the thought on that is it's already spinning the tires. You need as much help trying to get the tires to recover as you can possibly get. So yarding a bunch of timing out is going to kill some horsepower. Now, the downside of that, the engine's not happy. A lot of times, even when you get back to full throttle, it will have put one or two cylinders out, and they sound horrible when you do that.
When the cylinder goes out, does it ever come back?
Yes, they will sometimes. Keep in mind, even though we're running these huge generators that make enough amperage to do a small amount of arc welding, we run so much cylinder pressure, and you had asked me on blower boost. We see just about 60 pounds of blower boost in the lights there. And we're running so much volume of liquid fuel through the engine that we have to run 12 thousandths on the spark plug gap, or it literally will not jump that gap because of the pressure and the amount of liquid in there. So sometimes when you step on the throttle, we got a fuel slide valve. Remember, our fuel pumps are driven by the engine. They're driven at camshaft speed. So when the engine's at 8,000 RPM, the fuel pump's at 4,000 RPM. And it can't take all that nitro at the step. There's not enough load to burn it. We haven't started engaging the clutch fully there. So we've got a bypass system that when we step on the throttle, it sees pressure on one side. It's a slide valve. It will start to move a piston. And the further that piston moves, the less fuel that is recirculated or bypassed from the engine back to the tank. And now that starts going back towards the engine. So we see more fuel volume until we get to the middle of the track. And then we've got a regulator that will usually adjust at 510 PSI. And I didn't misspeak, at 510 PSI. Because when we get to the top end, when that engine continues to rev up, especially if it pulls timing out because of our limiter, we don't want to keep throwing more fuel at it. So a lot of times at the step, if the fuel system's not dead on, it might bobble a cylinder and pick it back up. Typically, you don't get that fortunate, because if it drops a cylinder, meaning the spark plugs are getting washed out and not firing, well, what happens is it cools that cylinder. That amount of liquid in there cools it down, and it makes it hard to reignite that. So usually if one goes out, it stays out.
Okay. And if I understand it right, you're also talking about between 2 and 3 to 1 air fuel ratio. So, and I don't know if you guys get into air fuel ratios,
Yeah,
but it's a huge quantity of liquid.
Yeah, it is not your 13-to-1 gasoline ratio. Yeah, and that's why we burn 14 gallons of fuel every time we make a run. That doesn't count the 5 gallons on the warm-up back in the pits. And if you do the math, the biggest fuel pumps that our cars will run are let's call them 112 gallons a minute. 90 gallons a minute is 1.5 gallons per second. Now, the fuel pumps are rated at 8,000 RPM engine speed. If the engine's revving higher, it's going to be bigger than 112 gallons. No engine out there that I'm aware of is capable of burning more than 90 gallons a minute. But what happens is when you get out in the middle and you start yarding on the engine, that clutch load starts coming in, pulling the engine RPM down. That engine's not at 8,000 anymore. It goes down to 6,800. You better have a big enough pump that even at 6,800 RPM, it's still capable of delivering 90 gallons a minute to the engine.
Got it. Okay, and that's what I've heard. Like, I go travel around occasionally with a pro stock or pro mod team here or there, and what I hear on these cars making a run, I hear them, the clutches are slipping hardcore at the hit until maybe 2/3 or three-quarters of the way down the track. Then you hear the RPMs drop, the engines lug real hard, and then they wind all the way up out the back door. So it sounds like the clutches are finally together, somewhere mid-track in the second half of the pass, something like that. My ear tells me that. What? Okay. So
That's
next question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No, it's a very accurate description. What happens is, as I mentioned, when that throttle goes down, it activates a switch for the clutch. So we have a series of clutch flows. The average team might use 6 of them to control the throwout bearing during the run. So think of it like me having a really intelligent left foot, okay? So I'm going to launch with a little clutch, and as the racetrack allows, I'm going to give it more and more and more and more and more until my foot's completely off the clutch. Even at that point, because of the amount of torque our engines are making, the engine's still way ahead of the drive shaft, which means the clutch is shearing or slipping. But what happens, it eventually gets to the point that it locks up and goes 1-to-1, and that depends on the grip of the racetrack. If you get a gorilla track, Chicago, Friday night, and conditions are nice and cool, we could lock the clutch up at 500 feet. If you get Norwalk in the middle of summer and the racetrack's 152 degrees, we might never lock the clutch up all the way to the 1,000-foot finish line. It might slip the entire way. Right. So what I mentioned is these timers. You've got 8 flow control valves in the clutch. So if you watch our crew chiefs, let's say the pair in front of us has done the burnouts and backing up, and the camera comes back to us in the water box, you might see the crew chief lean in, take the cover off what we call the toy box, because that carbon fiber box houses all of our controllers. And if you see them doing something like this, they're either increasing or decreasing an orifice for a flow control for the clutch, meaning the fluid is going to pass out slower or faster and move the clutch quicker or slower on the run. Every one of those flow control valves is controlled by a timer. If you see the crew chiefs doing this, they're stretching the timers further down track because conditions aren't as good, or they're bringing them closer to the starting line because they want to run quicker.
Awesome. So we call that open loop, no feedback type tuning. You are not allowed to use any electronics to measure clutch slip and have it correct real time. Your tuners are literally having to guess and take their best shot and hit that slip, right?
Yes, with a small asterisk. Okay, so if you looked inside one of our toy boxes, you're going to count 8 flow control valves for the clutch. And you're going to say, well, Jack lied to me. He said teams use 6 flow controls. Yes, we leave 2 for the regulator. And the regulator is not allowed to be programmed to do a specific thing for the clutch. But imagine this. Imagine that I got enough data that I knew what my clutch pressure graph looked like. In other words, the clutch pressure is how hard those 18 levers are pushing back on the bearing. Now, if the clutch wears a lot, they're going to press harder. If the clutch doesn't wear as much, they're going to press softer. So small clutch wear, low clutch pressure. Big clutch wear, high clutch pressure. Well, that could get us into a lot of trouble. So what we can do is parallel a couple of those flow controls. And what we can do is say, if the clutch pressure gets above, if this is my data line for an optimal run and the clutch pressure gets up here, I'm going to tell it let the bearing move back a little bit, because we don't want to upset the car once it moves back on its own. It would be too violent because the clutch arms have too much angle now because the clutch is worn too much. Conversely, if the clutch doesn't wear enough, the car, well, there's exceptions to this. The car could be slow. So we want to park that bearing for a little bit, let it catch up, and then try to salvage as much of the run as we can. But none of this, keep in mind, guys, this is taking place in 4 seconds. And the reality is that area of the run where this would affect things is 1.5 seconds. So you could have an F1 feedback system and it's still going to only have so much control on a nitro race car. But we can do some things to try to salvage runs that would otherwise either smoke the tires or be.
That makes total sense. You aren't allowed closed loop, but you've got a little bit of fallback there. I get that. So
we're still using a spare channel of our open loop system to double check our pressure numbers.
Understood. Okay, man.
All right.
That's more information than I've ever been able to glean in 20 years of Googling, watching NHRA. So that is effing awesome. I just got 1 or 2 more, and then I'll pass you on to the rest of the guys. Go ahead, Mark.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, right on, man.
He was talking about how.
That is a question. Now, you should have said, can I ask 2 questions? And then we would have let you ask the next one.
Shut down the guy from Fargo.
Can you see how much fun Jack is to work with now, guys? Just
when I was
get an idea.
So when I was growing up, I crewed on a top alcohol dragster, 300-inch wheelbase, not short like your car. And there was a time where we fired it up in the stand in the pits on the jack stands, and I had to drive the car because the driver was setting the ignition timing, and the car was idling. He blipped the throttle, and it is the most violent. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Oh, it was the most violent ride I've ever been in my life. It's the fastest I've ever been, and I was sitting on jack stands. I've always thought, how do you guys have time to even think what's going on, let alone make adjustments to the car down track?
Great question, and I got a perfect answer for that. The car is way more violent on jack stands, especially a dragster. The first time I warmed up a top fuel car on the jack stands, I thought, Lord, what did I get myself in for? It was flexing, it was jumping around, it was magnifying all the vibrations. The moment you put the car down on the ground, the rear tires absorb half of that. It is way, way different up on jack stands. And the other thing is, it's very possible you had your head touching some of the roll bar padding or something, and then everything's blurry and you can't see. Gary Selzy and I were on the starting line. We were on the starting line at Vegas on a Monday for a test session 10 years ago, and we were watching another Funnycar run. And it took off and ran, and I turned to Gary and I said, man, they are so violent from outside. And he says, I wouldn't drive one of those pieces of crap. It's when you're in the car, you're focused intensely on the target down track, which means you don't have time to look around and enjoy the sensations. And B, the exhaust is pointed away from you with the body to insulate it. You got a helmet, you got earplugs. But man, from outside the car, and if you're in the car on the jack stands, and you described that very accurately, it doesn't matter if it's blown alcohol or nitro. A dragster on jack stands is a handful.
Gotcha.
You feel better?
My last question.
Yeah, I do. That's a 20-year question that I've had.
See, it turns out he's more of a man than he gave himself credit for.
You got to meet him. I'm just teasing, Mark.
Good one.
So, next question. Is there any power management with fuel? Let me back up on that. Now, alcohol engines will do a lot of power management by flooding the motor out. Okay. Is there anything like that, or is it all strictly timing for you?
Yeah, but you know what? Anymore, even the alcohol cars aren't doing that simply because they can't afford to give away that ET. They'll do it with a little bit of timing management, but no. On ours, what we want is we want to try to duplicate the power level everywhere we go, ideally. Now, we can't necessarily do that at Vegas because it's a little higher elevation and the oxygen level's a little lower than, say, Maple Grove. We certainly can't do that in Denver because of the thinner air up there, but we do our best. And then we adjust the clutch for power management. Here's the easiest way to think of it. The higher the G meter, the longer duration that it stays high, the quicker the car will run. If conditions don't warrant that, it's a hot racetrack, there's a bump out there, it doesn't have a lot of rubber out there, we're just going to lower that G meter. And the way that we do that is not as much through power, it's through clutch management to bleed off a lot of that power.
Now, is the engine bouncing off the rev limiter at that point when you're not putting all of that power through the clutch? It's obviously bleeding off into heat, but is there anything, do you have to limit anything on the engine, or is clutch and timing enough to hold it in your target RPM range while you're phasing it in?
Yeah, great question, because you would think, God, if you took enough clutch out of it, the motor would just skyrocket till it blew itself up, but it won't. Right. That clutch is a pretty good amount of clamping load there.
Got it. Okay, last, I promise. I say that, but there'll be a lot more.
I don't care. They're great questions, man. We could do this for about 3 hours.
We're tuners, man. We're into this stuff. So,
by the way, guys, I made all this up. I really don't know any of this. That's why I'm the driver.
Yeah.
There's
and you're
a video
faking
coming
it
up
good,
right
dude.
now that they can see inside the car. I found like a helmet view kind of thing. I don't know if they gave you a pair of glasses to wear or if they mounted a camera on the helmet.
That's a test run at Phoenix. If it's the same one I'm thinking of, you're going to see me drop down my orange visor before the run.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the thing about that, Ron, is it's like watching drag racing on TV. There's two things that there's three things that just can't capture: the smell, the true sound, because the true sound overrides any microphone,
and the feel,
and the sensation of the shaking. Yeah, you can't capture that. But that's kind of cool as a first person sitting inside the car viewpoint.
Yeah, I had a feeling that was a set of glasses with a camera built into it. We use those in some other aspects.
Well, if I was really good, I could have held the video camera and driven the car, but I wasn't about to give that a shot.
Right. All right. So what kind of data are you allowed to capture on these things? Are you running a race pack setup? And I was told, I got to visit John Force one time when I lived out there, and he said, our test passes will run a lot more data gathering than, our off season we'll load it up with data gathering equipment, but we only run a certain limited amount during the races. Can you talk about any of the data gathering at all?
I'm not sure what he was telling you. To be quite frank with you,
there's never know with that guy.
Yeah, there's nothing we don't pick up now, unless they were trying some sort of traction control stuff back then and had extra equipment on the car. Well, actually, he's right, because there's a lot of things you could do with tire temp sensors, and you only have so many channels on a computer, whereas a test car, you can run an auxiliary computer. So we'll check engine RPM and drive shaft RPM. Okay, those are two directly monitored channels. Well, a lot of times from directly monitored channels, we'll get a third display that's a math equation. If you know engine RPM and you know drive shaft RPM, then you'll know clutch slippage, right? So we don't measure clutch slippage. It's just a math equation between those two channels. We'll measure throttle position. We'll measure blower boost. We'll measure fuel pressure. We will measure ride height. We want to see if there's bumps in the track. We'll monitor rear tire temperature. A lot of times you'll see that tire starts to get warm and then it smokes. And a lot of times, and it sounds like an oxymoron, we have what is called controlled wheel slippage or spin. Our tires don't go 1-to-1 with the racetrack till we get out to 300, 400, 500 feet. And if they're slipping, they're generating friction and heat, and that's not necessarily a good thing for the tires. But if we stick the tire, something has to give. And what's going to happen is it's either going to lug the motor down, or it's going to shear too much clutch and the car's just not going to move as quick as you want it to. So we got all our exhaust gas temperatures. I mentioned from fuel pressure and from boost pressure, we have a math channel that will tell us boost per revolution. I'm sorry, that's from engine RPM and boost. And what we want to know is if we run two different superchargers, and one of them we ran at 35.2% overdrive and the air got worse, so the next one we ran at 38.1, we couldn't compare them apples to apples, but with a boost per rev, we can see how the efficiency is working on those. We've got a channel based on engine RPM and fuel flow, not fuel pressure, fuel flow. We have a flow meter, which literally looks like a little windmill.
Turbine.
That the fuel, that's exactly what it is a turbine. And there you go with your technical terms again. And that will tell us CCs, or cubic centimeters, per turn, per engine revolution of fuel going into the engine. And it's a great way to be able to double check things like the blower efficiency, the fuel pump efficiency, things like that. We've got a G meter. We've got a 3-axis G meter, right? We're really concerned about longitudinal Gs, but we also want to know lateral Gs, especially if I'm having to correct. If I make a movement, the car goes out there and smokes the tires, and we see the lateral Gs spiked right at that point, you can be pretty convinced that too abrupt a turn from the driver didn't help the car or maybe made it smoke the tires. Front wheel speed, we measure that because a lot of times what we want to do is, let's say you want to compare a couple of runs, especially if your car goes out there at 400 feet and shuts off, and you want to see what it was like compared to a really quick run from 3 races ago. Well, you can overlay the engine RPM, but the engine doesn't tell you how quick you're going. So you can overlay the rear tire RPM, but because of that wheel slip, that still doesn't necessarily tell you how quick you were going. So you overlay the G meter. That's a little better indication, but the best indication is how fast was the car going. That's front wheel speed. So, and I'm probably telling you roughly about half the channel. So I think we monitor 47 different things there.
Nice.
Is
Excellent.
the number of
Man.
channels regulated under the rules? I haven't had a chance to read the book that deep.
No, Bill, I think they're regulated under the budget. When Race Pack comes up with a new system, it's like, wow, look at these extra capabilities. And remember, you've got some channels that are relatively easy to monitor, and then you got transducer channels that are prohibitively expensive and take up more room on the chassis. So, the crew chiefs would like to monitor 500 things, but that would weigh the car down, and then it would take you an extra 40 minutes just to disseminate the information after a run. Because remember, when we come back from a run, let's call it Sunday first round and we just won. The car comes into the pits. Okay, the crew's going to go ahead and tear the thing down to a bare down to a bare block with a camshaft. Meanwhile, the crew chiefs go in there, and as quickly as they can, they need to be able to tell the clutch guy what changes, if any, have to go into the set of discs and floaters for the next run, because he's got to be able to get them bolted in. And they also have to tell the right and left side engine guys how thick a head gaskets are going on based on the horsepower numbers they see, what tune-up they want. So all this has got to be done in about 20 minutes. Then once the crew starts putting the engine back together, the crew chiefs can dig in a little bit deeper and look at more information.
All of which has to happen in that, pardon my dog, 30-minute turnaround. In the in-car video with the orange visor, so we're on sync on that. You see the classic thing, you do the burnout, you back it up, the guys come around, they open up the top of the car, and they do something in the front. What are they doing?
I think they're setting idle.
We lost him.
Is that what they're doing?
Somewhere. His video froze, so he might be having some data issues.
I think they're setting the idle speed is what...
Did we have...
Is anybody still there?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
we keep coming and going. It might
for a
just
second.
be some
We
weird
just lost
data
the video.
connection on your end.
I thought Bill's dog chewed through the court. So, okay. So here's what we'll do. I'll take you guys through a whole run if you got time.
We got hours, brother. As long as you got
As long as you want to talk, we'll
So
listen.
here's what happens. We tow the car up in the staging lanes. 5 pairs back. I'm going to start getting all my gear on. I'm going to hop in the car. The guys are going to get me strapped in. During this whole time, the 2 crew chiefs are up on the track, looking at our lane, trying to come up with an intuitive guess on what the tune-up's going to be. So they're going to radio back with final blower overdrive, nitro percentage, and we've got an inspection cover on the clutch. We can add or take weights off. We can make some adjustments to lock-up levers, even while the car's in the lanes. So the crew's still doing that stuff even while I'm getting strapped in. When they're all done with everything, they button up the bell housing. They're going to put all the covers, fire covers and hand shields and stuff on the car. They're going to tow me up, disconnect, push me up to the water box. Back the golf cart up next to me. The starter's hung on the front of the supercharger snout. They're going to plug it into the batteries on the golf cart. And then we always windmill the motor. And that is fuel is turned off, ignition is turned off, and we're going to spin the motor over about 5 to 10 revolutions and make sure there is no residual nitromethane in the cylinders. Once they do that, I will crack the fuel lever to partially on, make sure the ignition switch is turned on. The crew is going to load the clutch. We have a CO2 bottle on the car, and they've got to make sure that throwout bearing is moved all the way forward against the clutch, so we have the starting point that we want. Once they do all that, when we get the starter signal from NHRA, they're going to squirt gasoline in the injector, spin it over, pull the jump wires off the magneto, so one mag goes live, it fires up, pull the other one off. At this time, I will go back to full fuel volume. In the old days, we had a low side and the driver would put on the high side before we went in and stage. The way we do our barrel valves today, most of us don't have to do it that way. So now the car is running. They're going to check the fuel pressure. They're going to drop the body down on me. I'm going to get the signal to move forward. So it's a handbrake. I'm going to let go of that. Left foot's clutch. I'm going to give it some speed to roll through the water, and I don't touch the brake. If I'm going too fast, I shove the clutch in. If I'm going too slow, I let it out. When I get the signal to do the burnout, our throttle opens about we got a clicked on the throttle cable right at the injector. So I'm going to go right onto that stop, smoke the tires, make sure I'm trying to keep the car pointed straight so my burnout tracks go straight. If we're going to run on top of my burnout tracks, it's pretty go straight. A lot of times we will intentionally burn out off to one side so we don't run in our burnout tracks. It'll peel rubber off the track. Well, if my burnout tracks go diagonally across the lane, I'm going to have to run over them for the run. So you're trying to put two straight stripes on the racetrack. I'm going to lift off the throttle, shove the clutch in, roll out and stop the car, let off the brake. I've got to reach down off to the bottom of the cockpit, put it in reverse. I'm going to back up behind the starting line, getting guided by the guy in front of me to get in the spot where the crew chief wants the car, where we think we've got the best contact patch on the starting line. Sometimes it might be in the center of the lane. It could be 3 feet off to one side or the other. If it is, he will typically have radioed me 2 pairs back and say, listen, Jack, we're going to put you over to the outside of the lane. Make sure you get it back in the center of the groove. Or we're starting way to the inside, keep it there for 150 feet, and then get it back in the middle of the groove. And I pretend like I understand what they're talking about and say 10-4. Anyway, so once I get done backing up and stop, I'm going to pull up a foot. I want to make darn sure that car is in forward gear. The body comes up. So what the crew chief is going to check at this point, because the whole goal of the burnout and this 2-minute pre-race ritual up there is to get good heat in the engine and not overheat the clutch. He's going to look down at the dash, which in a Funnycar is down by the front wheels, and he is going to trim the fuel pumps to get the flow rate that we want for idle. And he has got air bleeds on the side of the injector that he's going to adjust to get the RPM where we want it to be. Once he gets all that right, they're actually going to unplug the dash because it costs a lot of money and we don't want to shake it out of the car and take it with them. Body goes down. They're going to pull me up towards the starting line. Now, as they roll me up, he's going to stop me a few inches from pre-stage. You'll see a guy go behind the car and do the final check of the wheelie bar height. He's got a little template there and he'll adjust the wheelie bar. Our wheelie bars are not wheelie bars. Our wheelie bars are tire spin control. If you raise the wheelie bar way up, that car is going to squat way down, wad the tire up, and probably bounce up and smoke them. If your wheelie bar is way too low, your car's not going to pitch rotate. You won't get enough contact patch, and you're probably going to smoke them. Each crew chief does it in a different way. A lot of it depends on tire pressure. If they adjust the tire pressure a significant amount, they might say go up 1/8 of an inch on the wheelie bar, but that will be adjusted right before the crew chief gives me the signal to pull forward. Now, a lot of times you're going to see the crew chiefs lean in by the injector and do something and then give the thumbs up. That is called the television knob because it looks incredibly cool when they lean in there and turn that. You don't have to, but it's an enrichment valve. So let's say I'm idling at 3.8 gallons per minute at this point. Well, a lot like a carbureted car, if you didn't have that accelerator pump, when you crack the throttle fast, it's got a lean spot. So they're going to reach in and turn that enrichment valve, and now I'm flowing 5 gallons a minute there. It just gives it that little bit of extra fuel so the motor takes RPM cleanly. And then they'll motion me to pull in. I've got a handbrake. My foot is not giving any pressure on the throttle, but what I'll do is let go of the handbrake and roll up with the clutch, and when I light pre-stage, clutch in, stop the car. deep breath. If this is the spot you put your visor down, do it. Clear your thoughts, stare at the Christmas tree, and you are going to let off the brake, ease in slowly on the clutch, and as soon as you're staged, stop the car, and when that tree comes on, fire the throttle pedal down and get your hand back on the steering wheel.
I need a minute.
Sounds so easy.
That's
Wait
awesome.
Idling at 5 gallons per minute.
We haven't even left the Christmas tree yet. Yeah.
Go ahead, Evans.
I was going to say, the amount of fuel they idle on is more than most people are using at wide open throttle on their cars.
No, it's insane. It literally, in the pits on our warm-up, we're 5 gallons a minute. I mean, like, wrap your head around that. 5 gallons in 1 minute. Your car at 60 on the freeway gets to go 25 miles on 1 gallon, right? That's 25 minutes. We're 5 gallons in 1 minute at idle.
Yep. So now, do you start the thing up and run them on nitromethane now? Are the days of firing them up on alcohol gone, or what's going on there? When did that change?
Well, if the cost of nitro keeps going up, you could see some of the crew chiefs going back to that. But remember, on the warm-up, we want to make sure all of our systems are okay. And, that includes idle, that includes fuel flow. So if you're running with an auxiliary alcohol tank, which the guys that used to do that would just have a little dribbler tank that sat on top of the injector. So the idle RPM was dictated by how much alcohol went through there, and you couldn't monitor any of the channels. So the only guys that would ever do that would be very budget conscious guys. Now, a lot of times if we see, one of the things we do on our warm up is we run 2 complete ignition systems. We've got 2 plugs per cylinder. And during the warm up, one of our mechanics will ground out the front spark plugs, ground out the rear spark plugs. So let's say we go look at the data after the warm-up, and when he grounded out the rear spark plugs, number 5 cylinder went out. Well, it means the front spark plug in number 5 cylinder is bad, or the generator's bad, or the wire's bad. So we would change out some components there. Maybe we thought we had a weak coil. But regardless, if we had to do something like that, a lot of times we'll refire the car just on gasoline for about 5 or 6 seconds in the pits, just enough to make sure our ignition's working fine. But other than that, all of our warm-ups are always going to be on nitro.
No, we do similar testing in EFI. We call it the contribution test. We'll shut holes down, we'll shut injectors down, or we'll run on the primaries and we'll run idle on the secondaries to make sure all the EGTs are lit and everything's hot. That's cool, man. That makes me feel like I'm not completely dumb, but man, I'm going to pass it over to the rest of the guys, but I just want to say thank you. That was amazing. That's more information. I've been dying to hear this level of detail since I was about 9 or 10 years old. Right. So can't get that anywhere else. So thank you.
But it's always nice sharing in-depth stuff with people who are in depth. If I wouldn't have told my wife this, she'd be asleep in 2 minutes. Right. But the car people appreciate knowing the nuances of this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Especially us tuner nerds. That's awesome.
And I think a larger part of the audience, one of the reasons, and Jack, I appreciate the fact that you shared the time slip with us. Scott Evans, do we have that on the rotation?
Because it is in the pictures. Let me see if I can pull that stuff up.
Yeah, that was an Indy test from 2 years ago, I think. And that is actually my fastest run ever, but it's not considered official because it didn't happen at an NHRA meet. It happened at an NHRA test session. Yeah, but I think that was a 3.82 seconds at 337 miles an hour.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's all. And it was an 898, a .89860, I think, for those.
No, 868.
Oh, I'm sorry.
898. Yeah, 898 would be weak.
He's dragging the lights. Must have been the diaper hanging down or some shit. Donald Long's going to give you a call here shortly.
Federal lawsuit pending.
It's coming.
Just let it be known it wasn't me that dropped the S-bomb first, okay?
No
you
worries.
probably don't follow the outlaw drag racing too much, but there's stuff that we work in. There's some interesting drama going on after this last weekend, but anyway, so
Jack, you also teach driving at the Frank Hawley School.
Yes.
What's it like to do that?
I started there full-time in 1998, and I never quit there. In 2001, I worked at Pomona. In 2001, we reopened Gainesville, so Frank went back and ran the Gainesville classes. I ran the Pomona classes, and I did that until 2008, when, frankly, the economy had taken a tank and renting 2 racetracks made no sense whatsoever. So since then, I've taught a few of the classes at Gainesville. Frank and I have done some seminars, things like today. I literally spent all day up there. We filmed an episode for Jay Leno's Garage, and Frank and I drove some cars. It was a fun deal. I enjoyed Leno's Garage. I enjoy Jay Leno because that man is a true car guy who apparently has the budget to buy whichever car he wants. But we had a lot of fun up there. And then I'm going to actually go in next week when Frank's running one of the 2-day licensing classes there. But the cool thing about that, when I started driving Nitro in 2005 in Dragster, and then late 2006 when I started in Funnycar, I'd go run a race, hop on an airplane, be back to class Monday morning, and be talking to students through all the things that they need to do well to drive a super gas or a super comp car down the quarter mile at 160 miles an hour. And the light bulb kept going on in my head that, Jack, it's so important that you practice what you preach, because everything Frank teaches is true whether you drive a 10-second bracket car or a 3-second fuel car. It all is the right way to do it. And I really miss doing that. And I'm hoping in the near future, I'm going to have more chances to work with Frank and go back out and start teaching again.
I can't recommend that class, that course enough. I took that at Union Grove 6-7 years ago now. The thing that amazed me about that was the amount of time, and I realize now appropriately spent, on getting your head straight for how to compete. And the things that we talked about, the things that Frank introduced, and Jack, I look forward to when I come to improve my license next time around to go faster, go into one of yours. Hopefully that's an opportunity when you're there, because it was really fascinating to get into the depth of that. The other part that was always amusing to me. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Frank is one of the most amazing people I've ever met. Like, he has this ability. He could read 5 pages of medical text about how focus works on the eyeballs, right? And I read it, and I'd have to reread it 16 times, and I don't get any of it. And he will turn it into layman's terms and give you a 30-second description of the eyes. And you're like, I never thought of it that way. He just has this ability to teach things in a easily understandable way, and they make perfect sense.
Yeah, that I would double down on that. We're sharing that time slip now, Jack. And for some of you that don't see the video because you're listening to this in the audio, or you're listening to this as part of the podcast later on a download. So we're looking at a time slip, as Jack mentioned. It was from testing almost 2 years ago. And what the incrementals show is a not super time reaction time, but not bad, either a 0.08.
Well, hold on a minute. Wait, Bill, what's the reaction? Hold on a minute. What's the reaction time?
It's an 0.82.
What makes you think that's not a super good reaction time?
Because I've seen you go a little quicker.
Apparently, we need to talk about reaction times.
Let's do that.
When you see that 0.82, that means that car has left the stage beam 82 thousandths of a second after the green light came on. Well, guess what? You can't wait for green to come on, or you'd be a day late. So what happens is the ambers come on, and you react to that. Now, in my super comp dragster, when the ambers come on, I have a trans brake button on the steering wheel that's kind of like having a clutch on a button. I've got the throttle decked. I'm at 6,000 RPM, and all I got to do is let off the button. I'd red light. So I actually have a delay box to slow down the interface between me doing that and the transmission launching the race car. But when you get into a nitro car, what happens is they're idling at 2,500. You floor the throttle. They, in a tenth and a half of a second, they jump up to 8,600 RPM. And nothing happens. All it means is the flywheel's turning that fast, and all the floaters are turning that fast. But the clutch discs that are connected to the drive shaft, that's connected to the rear wheels, haven't done anything until that clutch, through centrifugal force, starts clamping everything together. Now you turn the drive shaft, which turns the pinion gear, which turns the ring gear, which rotates the rear wheels, and nothing happens except the car falls down until it hits the wheelie bar. Then that car's got to go forward 14 inches, because the stag, 14 and a half inches roughly, before it stops the reaction time. An 82 light from shallow ain't a bad light in Nitro Funnycar. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Bill.
Think about it. He doesn't have a trans brake, man. He's got to roll the throttle.
I wasn't saying it was a bad light. I was saying it was a good light. So,
hey, wait a minute, guys. Do you want to rewind tape on that? Sounded like he was saying it was a pretty
sure he
fast
said that
light.
wasn't that fast.
oh man,
Bill's a lawyer. Just move on.
Yeah.
Carry on.
The lawyer just got out lawyered.
Kidding.
Ask Bill.
No, but I need your help after this, Bill.
Ask Bill what his 60-foot time is.
You know, I always listen. I always tell people nitro cars don't move very fast that first 1 foot, but the next 999 feet, hold on.
Yeah, which is completely apparent because the 60-foot time is at 0.868. Now again,
Yeah, wrap your head around that. Now, also keep in mind, by the time we get to the 60-foot clocks, that car's going 85 miles an hour. These numbers make no sense. And I always tell people, if you've never been to a drag race and Friday night you went out to a bar and there's two guys sitting next to you talking about their experience that day at the races, you would swear they had way too much to drink because there's no internal combustion engine in the world on a wheel-driven car that could be that fast. Then Saturday you go out to the races and you're like, oh my God, everything they said was true. These cars defy physics.
They almost do defy physics, and you're the guy sitting in there as an actual human bolted into this thing, having to be able to see. I was good friends with a guy who got into an alcohol dragster long time ago when alcohol dragsters ran 7 flat, and he had a problem where he would black out when it launched. It was just physically, his head and the way he was wired and plumbed, he couldn't drive that car because the G-force was too high. So you guys are like fighter pilots in that there's a self-selection thing that goes on for the ability to actually sit and operate one of these cogently in that 3.87 seconds when you covered 1,000 feet.
Yeah, I don't want to. Here's the thing. If I told you that 0.1% population had the physical ability and less than that had the mental ability to drive a nitro funny car, it would make me seem more important and cooler. And the reality is just not true. We're not triathletes. We don't have to have genius IQs. In fact, it's beneficial to have a much lower IQ. And it's something that you train yourself to do. I don't know what was going on with your buddy. I'd suggest he was probably drinking before he got in the car, because our G-forces early in the run, and keep in mind a top fuel dragster is going to be more than a funny car because they're 250 pounds lighter, and with the engine sitting over the rear tires, they can be more aggressive with the clutch early. But our cars will go 4.5 G for the first 150 feet, and when the clutch stays on, up to 5.5 Gs at 350 feet, and that's when you know you're on a run. But these are all lateral Gs. You're sitting upright, and they're for a very minimal amount of time. Now, even at the finish line, our cars are still pulling a positive 2 Gs, and it swings to a negative 5.5 if both chutes hit the same time. They're impressive numbers, no doubt. But unless you got some physiological issues, you should be able to withstand that. In fact, Bill, if I had a passenger seat, we could do some stuff.
Whenever it's there, let me know. There is a weight penalty associated with that.
Some of those drivers have their own weight penalty built in. Just saying.
Hey, now.
Yeah, exactly. So the other incremental, since a lot of our folks are kind of tuned into a lot of the outlaw stuff and other things, and I think they're getting a clue here about they might not have quite realized really how fast these cars are, because the increment that the people will understand, because there's so much 8th mile racing these days, is a 310 at 288 in the 8th. Now, say
that again, 3.10,
yes.
288 miles an hour. It's like those numbers defy logic. And a funny car has gone, it's either 292 or 293 to the 8th mile. The dragsters, I think 297 or 8 at the 8th mile. It's just mind blowing.
let's just put that into perspective for some people so they can relate about it. I have customers who run bottom fours, sub 450s on a 275 radial tire car, turbocharged, 3,000 pound car, and they go 295 to the 330. So
which is flat getting with it.
Right.
Yeah, and a top fuel dragster would almost be actually a top fuel dragster has run that quick to half track.
Right. And, 295, 295. That means a top fuel dragster is at the finish line while this turbocharged radial car is just getting to the 330 cone.
Yeah, but if it makes them feel better, the top fuel car costs way more money.
Well, yeah, I can relate to that.
Enough, in terms of development time and everything. Yeah,
right.
The money being spent on these radial versus the world cars now is fast.
Well, I mean, per run. I mean, you figure that top fuel. If that top fuel driver hurt nothing on that run and didn't pay anybody on the crew, and the racetrack was in his backyard, so there was no hotel, no airfare, or any of that stuff, it cost him $5,000 in parts.
Yeah, which is the phenomenal thing to think about. And loans, one of the things that I've known Brian since 2005, and one of the things we were so happy about that he brings, because we know him in other contexts, is helping people get along with understanding these things a little more. And one of the things he was talking about on air, and you were actually in the booth for a while, and as you know, you have a great career ahead if you ever decide to retire and get on the other side of the mic. But he helps people understand that this is why the single teams, where they've got volunteers and helpers, when they have to do the turn in 30 minutes versus you guys that are fluid and everybody knows their job and has been doing it, that's tough. That's really tough.
Right. Now, to be accurate, we got 75 minutes. And what happens is, let's say that first round, there's going to be 8 pairs of funny cars that run, and we run in the third pair. That 75 minutes starts when the 8th pair turns off the racetrack, unless it's a live TV issue or a threat of bad weather is coming. They can shorten that down to 55 minutes. Now, let me tell you, with 55 minutes, if nothing goes wrong, let's say you won the semifinals, so there's not a whole lot of other cars that are going to run after you, you get with it. You can service the car, you can warm the car, you can get the body back on, you can tow up to the lanes and take a 3-minute breather. If anything goes wrong, if you had any sort of hiccup on the run, you were missing data, if something was an issue on the warm-up, you're going to be pinched for time. You're going to have to make the change and drag the car up the starting line, sometimes even without a warm-up.
Yeah, it's an amazing process to watch. For anybody listening to this, if you haven't gone to an NHRA event recently, if you
gotta go
because they are selling out, you gotta go, and you gotta take some time to hang out in the pro pits and just see what's involved. Watching them dump the entire clutch from the last run sort of unceremoniously on the ground by the back of the trailer, because the thing is, God, I don't know, still 1,000 degrees or something. And doing
that trash pile.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So Bill, you're right on the money. Can I take a minute 15 and tell you guys about our between rounds maintenance?
Oh, please.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. Was all the crew stuff.
Okay, come on, dude.
So
that was next.
So I always encourage fans. I said, look, do your magnificent team runs. Give them 8 minutes and walk back to their pits, because what will happen is I've pulled the chutes, I'm slowing down, I coast to a stop. If I'm still on the racetrack, they're going to get their ATV scooters and push me off. Once I get off the racetrack, I get out of the car, our tow vehicle comes down, they turn around, back up, hook the tow rope up to it, put the body up, put the body pole in. They're going to disconnect a couple hoses, take some of the shielding off the car so another crew member can get in and steer it back. We've got to tow it over. They're going to check the percentage of nitromethane in the tank. The run is not an official run until NHRA says so. And it means if asked, you have to go through fuel check and you have to weigh the car. So we're going to tow up, put the car on the scales. I hop on there. We've got to weigh 2,585 pounds minimum after the run. Now we got to tow back through the crowd to the pit. So all this takes some time. And Bill, when I told you it's a 55-minute turnaround, that's counting towing back through the crowd, weighing the car on the scales. All this stuff's eating up the clock. So we're going to tow into the pits. The car pulls in. And if you guys are watching there, and this is why I want the fans to pick a team and go watch, just hit go on your stopwatch. The car is going to pull in, hydraulic jack stands go under it, jack the car up, body comes off the car, goes on a dolly, goes to the front of the pits. They're going to drain 18 quarts of hot oil out of it. The guys are going to be on each side. They're going to take all 16 spark plugs out of it. The 2 clutch guys are on the back starting to disassemble the bell housing and the drive shaft. Now we're going to take the injector and intake manifold, injector, supercharger, and intake manifold off the car. Now the right and the left side guys unbolt the cylinder heads. They come off the car. After the oil's drained, the bottom end guy drops the oil pan down there. Now he's going to go around and knock all 8 rods and pistons out of the car. The clutch guys have now got the bell housing off. And Bill, you weren't far off. It takes 1,800 degrees minimum to turn some of the alloys in our clutch material liquid. And you can see on every run, there's a smear. So it's at least that hot. That thing is still 800 degrees 12 minutes after we've run. It's smoldering. They're going to take that out. Now you've got a car down to a bare block, and it's been 8.5 minutes. And 27 minutes later, it's running with fresh parts. Mind-blowing what these guys are able to do. And here's the thing. If they're not fast, we don't get to run. If they're not perfect, you will very easily see at 600 feet on the next run, it's going to lift a cylinder head or drop a valve. They have to be perfect.
Wow. That's like I think about just the things I do on my own personal car when I go racing. And I do simple stuff, you double check valve lash, and you make sure you got gas in the tank, and then you repack the parachute, and that's, ready to go racing again. There's not a whole lot more, you pull a data log and look at things and try to figure out if you need to make an adjustment for the track, or if you need to do anything, if you think you can put more in it. It's all of 10 or 15 minutes for me to go through what I need to go through usually. I think about doing that whole routine of all of that, and the amount of stuff that you guys do on that car is way, way, way more than most people can do. It's obvious that it's got to be a multi-man crew like it is.
One of the things that was brought up is if you haven't been to an NHRA race recently, you need to go. One of my favorite things to do is to bring somebody to the track who has never been to a national event before. That is so much fun to watch them experience an NHRA event for the first time. And the thing about it is you could talk about how cool pro stocks are and how cool the funny cars are and the top field dragsters and and you could talk about it nonstop for 364 days and bring them to the track on day number 365, and they still won't be prepared for the just the sensory overload. And it is, if you've never brought somebody to the racetrack for their first time to a national event, you have to just, it's fun watching them experience for the first time. It really is.
Even going back more than the first time is great. The second time, third time, every time you go back, it's still, there's something new and interesting every time. Like I go every year to a race, and every time I go back, I'm still just going, wow, holy crap. Because a year passes sometimes before you can get to the next one. Your body and your brain forget all those sensations of exactly how great they are. That smell of the tires and the nitro and the alcohol all combined in the air. You don't get it just looking at it from afar. You have to be near it. And if you get that big waft of the smell and the sensation, especially if you go into the pits during warm-up and you get the fumes of warm-up into your eyes and you're tearing up because it just burns, you won't ever forget that thing, and you'll think it's the coolest thing ever. It's, as much as it sounds to say, hey, I got tear gassed by a funny car, it's one of the coolest experiences you can have.
I can't disagree with any of that.
I would even say it doesn't matter if you only go to the track once a year or 20 times a year. Every time I'm there crewing for any of the drivers I do for our series, like it doesn't matter, drift, drag, whatever. Every time I'm at the track, that happens. If you're a car guy, I think you're going to have that reaction, even if you're at the track every week, to be honest.
Yeah, there's some detachment. You guys are hands-on guys. And I think a lot of people think, well, these nitro guys all make $1 million a year and they've got 10-year contracts. And I hope, if nothing else on this conversation, it proves I'm a car guy just like you guys. By the way, I mow my own lawn. I don't make $1 million a year. It took me 3 years to get my car behind me here done because I don't want to pay somebody else to do it. Plus, Bill came over and worked for free for a day. So, but we're all still car guys. Some of us are fortunate enough to get a paycheck to do it. Most of us put our own money into the car. And Bill, you're right. There truly isn't the right words in the English language to describe what it's like to watch these cars run. And I'm a fan of all motorsports, but I like all of drag racing. I like the pro stock cars. I like the bikes. I love super stock. I love factory stock. But as a kid, something just hit me hard with the nitro cars. They just shook the ground. And to be able to go back to the pits and watch these guys get out of the cars. And when you're 7, everybody seems 8 feet tall. But, metaphorically, they're still 8 feet tall. But I haven't lost the fan part of me. I still love the fact that I enjoy the sport very much, whether I'm strapped in the car or watching somebody else.
So, Jack, you talk about the impact, and I'm going to ask one of those kind of complicated questions. One of the videos we have cycling through is Q3 from the 2016 season, where it literally blew the body into pieces. Anybody who's driven for any length of time in the fuel classes has had something happen. Can you both describe a little bit about what is happening when that happens typically, so that people can kind of understand the mechanism? In other words, why do they blow up like they do? And then, what do you?
Nitro is very volatile.
That happens.
Yeah, the cause of every explosion, we filled the fuel tank with nitro. That was Epping 2016. And in my entire Funnycar career, the only qualifying run I have ever missed was the next run. We obviously brought out a spare car, and we just needed the time to make sure everything was right before we went into eliminations the next day. And we actually wound up making the semifinals. I remember that run really well because we were already qualified. We were in the left lane. The car goes out there and makes a little bit of a move. And in my eyes, I let it get too far inside. I let it get out of the groove. Now, usually the answer is not that simple. It's not like I forgot how to drive. The cars sometimes do some odd things, and when one tire moves out of the groove, it will try to exaggerate that move. The tires started to spin a little bit, so the engine RPM came up, and the next thing I knew, I was covered in oil and fire. And when that happens, that explosion's pretty big. In fact, I was going through my phone to find pictures to send to you the other day, Bill, and I should have sent it. My friends that are at the track prep crew with NHRA came up to me later that day, and they said, they're 10-foot sections of wall at Epping, and they're probably 14 inches wide. And they said they had to move one of them back into place. It was out 1.5 inches. And I said, that's not possible. He said, no, not only that, but if you look at the outside of the wall, it had knocked a chunk of concrete out of each end of that wall from blowing back against the other one. And I went and looked and I took a picture. The explosion was violent enough to move a 5,000-pound piece of concrete. Oh. Yeah. So on that run, the camshaft broke. But see, I thought I was partially responsible for that happening. So let me tell you, when I got the car stopped, I felt about that big. I felt like as a driver, I didn't do a good enough job of A, keeping the car in the groove, and B, reacting to the tires starting to slip and just stepping off the throttle. And the end result was a ton of extra work for my guys. Well, we found out here's what happens. You start taking power to a different level and something fails. So you make a better part there. And then something else fails. And you wind up chasing it all the way around till you've got bigger, heavier, more expensive parts everywhere. Then you go after more power. And we were right at that ragged edge. So we've changed the way we case harden the camshafts and the base or the core size of the camshafts and the materials there. And let me tell you, when a camshaft breaks, that's the end result is you leave an intake valve open somewhere. And when that spark plug fires, it's a fuel air bomb. If you look closely at that video, that supercharger wasn't more than 8 inches from my head, and had it not had the straps on it, I'd have been shoving it out of the roll cage there. So as a driver, when that happens, I have a bunch of immediate reactions. And when I say reactions, you better have gone over this in your head because you can't think this quickly. Pilots get a chance to do this in the simulator. We've got to practice it with our eyes closed and go over scenarios there. So when it blows up, the first thing I want to do is get the parachutes out. If you watch that video closely, you're going to see me take my right hand off and reach for parachute levers that are no longer there because they blew off the car with the body. Fortunately, that means the parachutes will deploy themselves. So the moment I realized, okay, I get on the brake handle and I squeeze the fire bottles there to try to get the fire to go down. Now, the fire was not terrible on that run. The thing that was rough was there was so much oil on my visor, I couldn't see anything. So you watch me a few seconds into it, reach up and wipe my visor with the back of my glove. And that's when I realized I'm actually still in the middle of my lane. So when you blow one of those cars up, what happens is that explosion tries to shove the car into the ground. And it'll bend the chassis down till it touches the ground, and it wads the tire up like a basketball. Well, when it rebounds, the car jumps off the ground. So now you've got a car with oil all over the tires, fire in your face, and the rear tires are off the ground. And your job right now is to mitigate further damage. So you're trying to keep it off the wall. I'll always grab a little bit of brake, and if the thing slides, I will keep it in the middle of the lane until I can slow it down. If it seems like I've got good braking, I'll start pulling it over so I'm not spraying oil all over the middle of the lane. And what happens is when you get out of the car after something like that, there wasn't time to be scared. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, let's say you're going down the freeway and 5 car lengths ahead of you, a guy spins out and hits the wall and you've got to take evasive action. 5 seconds after that, your heart rate triples and you get this flush feeling. You don't get that when something like that happens in a nitro funny car. First off, I'm pretty sure your heart rate was tripled when the car started. Secondly, the bad thing already happened, and your job now is to avoid more bad things. So once you get the car safely stopped and you're like, I've still got 10 fingers and 10 toes and hop out, it's actually a pretty good feeling at that point. It could have been worse.
That's awesome.
Man. Yeah. No, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, for those of you that have been in a wreck, your brain adjusts to the speed that it needs to get things done. I think these guys are working at that speed like every pass. The way I know that is that I watch, when you see the in-car cams, you watch these guys are lock to lock sometimes on the steering, like multiple times going down the track. You always hear the road course racers, oh, it's real hard just to get in to step on the gas. Well, idiots. No, these guys are driving these cars. And you see it so fast. I'm like, how can they even respond? But it's your brain stepping up to the pace that it needs to. It's either that or you're huffing oxygen or on meth or something. But
you see
something's making your brain go fast.
You see a funny car driver after a 4-second pass, and he's more wiped out than a late model dirt racer after 30 laps.
Yeah, but
right?
Really the reality, the reason we're breathing hard is you're strapped in that car so damn tight. By the time you turn off the racetrack, you can't breathe really deep. Let me rephrase. If you're strapped in as tight as you're supposed to be strapped in, you can't breathe that deep because your lungs won't expand that much. The harnesses won't let you.
I want to have you
when
pause
you
for
get
1
out of the
second.
car, it's hot, it's tough to breathe, and then you're using some physicality to get out of there.
I want to have you pause for 1 second on that thought. Strapped in tight enough that you can't breathe. We try to emphasize safety on this show a lot because we see a lot of wrecks. We understand the physics of them. We see people who get injured. We understand what causes and what things to do, and we're big advocates of safety stuff. The thing you just said is just as important for the 13-second car as it is for the 3-second car. Strap yourself in as tight as you can get it, as hard as you can get it. Have somebody else tug on them. Make it so that you can barely breathe in that thing. Enough that you can still breathe to not pass out, but make it so tight that you cannot move your body around, because if something happens with that car, that's the thing that's going to keep you from getting hurt. The more your body moves, the more chance you can get hurt.
Guys that have talked at length about safety, and it's outstanding. We love that topic. Carry on.
Yeah, some people are smart, some people aren't. Most of us are smart in certain areas and not smart in others. You'd be surprised how many people are stupid when it comes to their own safety. So I can't tell you how many crew members over the years have told me when I'm having them tighten me down, they're like, none of my other drivers ever wanted to be this tight in the car. And I said, I don't want to be this tight in the car, but if the things upside down. I don't have time to go back and tighten myself down the way I was supposed to be. If you ever watch any tests on how much these harnesses stretch under impact and G-loading, it's stunning. What it's supposed to do is limit your body movement during high G decelerations in the car. It can't do that if you can flop the things around. And I see guys with holes in their gloves, helmets with cracks in them. It's just amazing how people take all this stuff for granted, but tell their friends how safe they are.
Yeah, appreciate that, Jack. This is something that's been difficult, and as Scott Evans mentioned, we've covered this topic multiple times in this podcast because, unfortunately, we've had friends who have had bad things happen. Dan Parker, who was one of our hosts on here, because of the impact he had on a pro mod car, is now profoundly blind.
And he's listening tonight and wanted us to say hi from Dan. He tried to log in, but he was having issues. So he wanted us to let him know wanted to let us know that he was listening tonight.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Dan has now set a record at Bonneville for the world's fastest man on a motorcycle, and is working.
Blind man.
Blind man. Yeah. Driving it himself.
But it was
no
a
assistant.
record.
But he actually holds a class record. It was a class record, not for blind people. Yeah, he did. He does own a record. He's
An actual record. So
yeah,
he's coming back from that, but that's unfortunately that he has to come back from that. And not that he necessarily did anything wrong or the team did anything wrong, but sometimes stuff happens. Jack, there were some data points on your website. By the way, folks, you're wondering where some of these things are coming from. If you go to www.fastjack, you can find all these things.
Hey, Bill, it's 2019. I think the www is superfluous at this point, right?
Probably.
But the .com part he left off is not, because there's .com, .net, .biz.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you know what? Google Go Fast Jack. That'll get you there. Hey, and speaking of which, I got to back up. I think Scott did the intro and said I got the Funnycar record at 3.91. That was current in 2015. Robert Height has the Funnycar record at 3.79 seconds right now.
Jeez.
Yeah, and Bill, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You're saying data points off the website. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying a lot of the video, a lot of the other things, when I quoted 30 minutes to turn the car around, there's a video on the DSR site that looks at kind of from when the car gets pulled into the spot to when it's going to be pulled back out to go to the front.
Time lapse.
They quoted the 30 minutes, the time lapse, all the interesting data points on that. So in case you thought I was a complete idiot when I came up with that number, I had help.
Hey, Bill, my brakes work perfect thanks to you. I think you're a complete genius, and I'm going on record saying that.
Thank you very much. The rest of our
actually, you're right. No, Bill, you're exactly right. When I said it can be as little as 55 minutes from run to run, you're exactly right, because we still got to tow back from the run and we still got to tow up for the next run and get me strapped in the car. Literally, we could turn the car in the pits in 32 minutes.
Yeah. So we kind of had a little tangent a minute ago about safety and how it applies to all forms of racing. One of our hosts here, Tom Vigue, is one of the most knowledgeable guys at understanding valve train dynamics, operates Spintron, has done it for NASCAR, is now at Brian Tooley Racing along with Little John at Little John Motorsports is one of our hosts. He asked the question, is there another form of racing that you would like to do or try driving, or have you already?
Yes, yes, and yes. Okay, so growing up, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley. Indian Dunes was a motorsports facility up by where Magic Mountain is now, if anybody knows where that is. And before I went in the Air Force, I had this old Plymouth Fury 3, and they used to do claimer racing. Couldn't have more than $350 in the car. Circle track, dirt, and they watered it down. Almost the most fun I've had on four wheels. Fast forward a few years later than that, Saugus Speedway, it's where they filmed the Sammy Hagar I Can't Drive 55 video. Figure 8, train racing, 3 cars chained end to end, middle car empty, and my brother and I did that. That's
he is a most fun. Wonderful.
That's
awesome.
Probably the most fun I've had. I would love to get an open wheel road racing, like that Formula 4 deal, something where they're all spec cars and it doesn't cost you a fortune to go race. I think that would be an absolute hoot. But I'm going to tell you this. I love motocross. I love monster truck, and I love everything else with an engine and tires.
Yeah, that pretty much goes along with us. Yep. That's how we feel about basically everything. If somebody's out there beating on it, breaking it and speeding it up and coming back and fixing it after it was broken the next weekend, then we're down. That's good.
Yeah, I like it with wheels and tires as long as it has a shell around it. I don't like the ones without the body protection.
So, Jack, we've spent a little time, and this might be a good time to talk a little bit about history. And this question is going to go two routes, and you can decide which way you want to go first. The one route of history is a little bit about how did you end up being one of this very tiny top of the pyramid, be a professional funny car driver? That's number one. And then going back to the beginning, and that car that we've been seeing behind you, the El Camino, I think that's the beginning of your drag racing career. So I'm willing to bet you can weave this story to better than any of us, the rest of us could. So could you show us a little bit about the car and the El Camino?
Yeah.
Pictures about the history.
I'll give you guys, and if I'm not pointing right, remind me. Okay, so this car, my dad bought from the first owner in December of 1979. And I bought it from him when I was 15. I took my driving test in it. I made my first run down a drag strip in it. I raced it for years. And everything I did back then was about a better ET slip and a trophy. And then I got a dragster, and then it was about racing for money. And, I kind of got carried away. And the funny thing is now that I'm in a Nitro funny car, it's kind of all about an ET slip and a trophy again. But this car was in storage at my buddy's place for 3 years while my other friend and I, Jerry, built this garage that it sits in. And the funny thing is it's as big a garage as I could permit on this the lot that we have. And I got a free car lift in here that barely fits. The car only goes up 37 inches, but I feel like the coolest guy on the planet because I got my own car lift. But anyway, so this car started my drag racing career. My first run was made in 1986 in Lubbock, Texas. I was stationed in New Mexico. I drove the car 100 miles to Lubbock, Texas, and I ran 15:06 at 93 miles an hour, and I still have the time slip. So then I did everything I could to go quicker and faster. I would drive anybody's car. I bought a used dragster rear engine car from a guy, ran it for a few years, built my own car in January 95. That's the car I won the Super Comp National Championship with in 2003. It sits at the NHRA Museum right now. And then from that point, I went to the Frank Hawley School. I got my top alcohol dragster license. The deal is my dad wasn't rich. My parents didn't have a racing name. And if I was going to take it to the next level, it was going to be out of my dime and my time. And so I was an elevator repairman. All my overtime went into my racing. I never took a sick day. All my vacation time was spent at a drag strip, and I loved it. Didn't feel like I missed a thing. So once I got my alcohol dragster license, a couple opportunities opened for me, and most of the rides that I had, I paid to drive their cars. Let's face it, when a guy's fielding a car out of his own garage on his own dime, they're not looking for a driver that they think is cool. They're looking for somebody to help share in the expenses and keep this thing running out there. And then I got cancer in 2004. And after I went through chemotherapy on that, I'm at Phoenix in early 2005, racing the Super Comp car at the national event. The national anthem's playing, and I'm standing in the staging lanes next to the top fuel cars. Roger Comstock, who's a good friend of mine, he and his wife Karen raced with us for years. They still race in top dragster, super gas, and factory stock, and just became great friends. And Roger said, "You really want to do this, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." And Karen had been through cancer. Roger had a soft spot because he'd almost lost her, and he realized there was more things in life than money, and he's a good businessman. We put a deal together. I ran 12 races in top fuel in 2005 in Dexter Tuttle's car. And we knew we weren't going to run the next year in that car. We went and we talked to Don Schumacher. At that time, he had Tony Schumacher and Melanie Troxel driving top fuel cars for him. And I was always a dragster guy. And we wanted to run a third top fuel car with Don. And as the months wore on, it became apparent he couldn't get the logistics handled and the rest of the funding to field another top fuel car. I just went back to running my dragster. So I am heading to a divisional race in Reno, Nevada in July of 2006. And the phone rings, and it's Don Schumacher. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to a race right now." I said, "I wish it was in your car, but it's in mine." He said, "Well, why don't you fly out to Indy this week?" You know what? I know when it was. It would have been August, because it was the week before the U.S. Nationals. There's a test that most of the Nitro teams do. He says, "Why don't you come out and make 2 runs in the car? Make a 330, make a 660 squared." He says, "Here's the deal. Before I talk to you and Roger any more about business," he said, "I got to make sure you don't pee your pants when you get in the car." He said, "It'd be a moot point to go any further until I see if you could even drive the car." So I flew out and made 2 squirts in the car and flew back home and never heard from him.
2 passes? Sorry. Go ahead.
That's funny. That was a good one. Yes. Not the pee in the pants squirts. Yes. A 330 and a 660.
And 1 pair of pants or something. That's good.
If we're back to 2 squirts in the past, that was me on jack stands.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do recommend you wear a dark fire suit. So anyway, this whole process, Don was getting rid of Whit Bazemore, who was the driver of that car. And so he calls again a month later. He says, "Why don't you fly out to Indy? We'll finish getting your license and we'll debut at Maple Grove." And it was more than a dream come true. So to paint a complete picture here, once I'd done the 12 races in the top fuel car and I won a grand total of 4 rounds, I thought that was it. I'd achieved my dream. I got to run a Nitro car. I didn't have the funding or the popularity to go any further. I'm just going to go back and race Super Comp for the rest of my racing career. So when this came along, it was a lot more than a second chance, because I didn't dream big enough to dream of driving for Don Schumacher in a car that's going to win races and is going to contend for championships. Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you a paycheck for doing all of this. And I'm going into my 13th full year of doing this, and there's still pinch me moments. Now, I'm married. I have a 13-year-old and a 7-year-old. I need to pay a mortgage. I need to provide for my family. I don't have a retirement or a pension from being a Nitro driver. And you get to the point that you start wondering and worrying about, is there going to be a job next year? Is this going to last 2 more years? Do I have to go back to fixing elevators? What am I going to do if this ends? But I got to tell you, the ride has been absolutely phenomenal. With the trophies that we get for winning a national event, the right amount of trophies is one more than you have right now. My point is, it's never enough. You never get to a point where you go, well, God, if I never won another trophy, this would be awesome. But I'm going to tell you something. When I see I've got 28 national event wins in a Funnycar, 2 in Super Comp, I've won 4 of the shootout races. I never thought I would do that. I didn't know I was allowed to dream that big. So it's been pretty phenomenal.
Once again,
did I just lose the data?
Little data issues on his end. It sounds
never gone into combat. To be able to do something for these guys and gals that gave a lot more than they should have given is.
Hey, Jack,
Stupid
I don't know
wireless
if you can hear us, but could you open the garage door? We're getting a little bit of signal drop out from time to time.
Or disable your video so that the audio can come through better.
Yeah, that would be the other.
Are you guys talking to me?
Yes, we are.
It was breaking up a little bit there, that last 10 seconds.
So to disable the video,
bottom, just click the little video icon. And that'll at least make it so your bandwidth is strictly audio.
There you got it.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So I don't know where I lost you guys on that.
Yeah, you were just transitioning a little bit into the Infinite Hero stuff.
You were talking about how you have these multiple wins and multiple things, and then we kind of lost you.
So don't feel bad about going back and repeating a little bit.
I literally just caught your last sentence, Bill. I apologize. 2019, and we're figuring this out, huh?
Yeah. Well, think about what we're doing. We're live broadcasting with multiple hosts in multiple locations on a setup. Thanks to Scott Clark and Scott Evans, it's actually pretty sophisticated. But the bottom line is we're reaching people simultaneously on Mixler, Facebook, YouTube. We're archiving all of this and making it available to people, none of which have to pay for
all
any
over
of this.
the world.
All over the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got.
You'll have 3,000 listens to this by tomorrow morning.
So if you guys again wanted me to repeat any of that, let me know where I cut off, and I'll try to fill in.
Yeah. So if you can you were up to how you've got all the big trophies from all the national event wins. Okay. So I go in my house and I look at these trophies, and I got a Super Comp championship, a Funnycar championship, and I didn't know I could dream that big. I didn't know my life could be that quote unquote successful based around drag racing. And the wild thing is, I can only think of two cars specifically. I know a lot of people are going to argue with me, but I do mean on the way they're funded and the way they contribute. And it's my car with Infinite Hero and Tommy Johnson with Make-A-Wish, where both cars are completely funded by a family, the Chandlers in this case, and all the money they raise goes to change lives. So as a veteran, and I never had to go into combat, to be involved with this Infinite Hero program where all the money we raise gets to change injured veterans' lives. And the rewarding thing about that also is that we get to see where our money goes. We have a grant committee, all the funding we raise, we pick programs that we know will work. We issue them a grant. Every cent of that is audited, and we get to meet the people whose lives we've changed. So I can have a crappy weekend at the races and rest assured that we still did some real positive things for injured veterans.
I think that's probably my favorite part of the whole program is that you guys are giving back.
That is so.
Yeah, in fact, last Sunday at Houston, broke a rod bolt first round. Crappy day at the races. And we still raised $8,300. What happens is every time we go down the racetrack, we load the car up. If you're in the military, you know what a challenge coin is. Let's say you're 82nd Airborne or 51st Bomb Disposal Squadron. You'll mint up these challenge coins that have your squadron insignia on one side and the script of what your squadron does on the other. And you carry them with you. It's a way to identify yourself when you're not in uniform. So we have Infinite Hero challenge coins. I take them down the racetrack. If fans want a cool souvenir, it's a $100 donation. You can do it at the races. You can go on infinitehero.org and do it. And all that money goes into our grant fund. Our grant committee is 100% volunteers, and every grant we issue is audited 100%. It's just a great way of being stewards of the donor's money and getting it to the most efficacious way, helping injured veterans. So our coin
to me, that's
program,
the best part right there. That is the fact that you guys are tracking where this stuff is going. It's not landing in somebody's pockets. It's not a not-for-profit that's managed by some guy making seven figures. That's good stuff.
Yeah. I always tell fans, I says, listen, you send $20 online to, a cancer prevention center, or you go walk a 5K for a child abuse deal. You get that warm, fuzzy feeling, but the reality is you have no idea how your money gets spent. It could go to wallpaper or a first-class plane ticket for somebody. We take that money and put it in the right places. Here's the other thing, too. Oakley started Infinite Hero and years later pulled their logo off all the Infinite Hero stuff because they said, we're not doing this for Oakley. They pick up all the overhead because they want that money to go change the veterans' lives. Now, we could pound our chests and start our own programs, and if the program works, it took you $250,000. If the program doesn't work, you might have wasted $500,000 and nobody got better. There's a ton of programs out there that do tremendous stuff for the vets and can do even more with more money. Those are the ones we want to get funding to. Brain health, man. You got a lot of people with post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury. We are on the leading edge of funding that. There's a skiing outfit called Vail Veterans Organization or Association, and it's for amputees to ski. And somebody says, wait a minute. I'm sending my money in so you can go let a soldier ski? Yes. Think about a 21, 25-year-old guy full of piss, fire, and testosterone who goes off to war and comes back missing 2 limbs. That guy's life's over. He's laying on the couch at his mom and dad's, or he's married and he's not functioning anymore. All he wants to do is die. He can't do anything he used to do in life, and nothing's enjoyable. We send him with 12 other similarly injured people out for the adrenaline rush of a weekend, and it makes them realize, you know what? I am not alone, and there are things out here that I can still do. It's not the same normal I was before the injury, but this is going to be my new normal. It gets them metaphorically up on their feet and ready to resume their life. Yeah, that's a great way to spend money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So that creates an interesting question, Jack. And you've got some of the really cool stuff posted on this on gofastjack.com. No www. Thank you. I'm old. But you
HTTP.
Yeah. Backslash. Anyway, you had MD Anderson, the MD Anderson Cancer Center, on the car and on your fire suit. Very impressive.
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you.
Yeah.
Let me give you a little background of that. Terry Chandler, her brother Johnny Gray was my teammate in Funnycar, and when Johnny retired, Tommy Johnson took over driving for that team. Well, when he retired, his sister Terry said, "Wait a minute, brother. I love the racing. I don't want to stop coming out here." And Terry has always been somebody who doesn't. She's never been shy about using her money to improve lives. And she was huge on the children, orphanages, shelters, things like that. So Make-A-Wish was a natural fit for her. So she said, here's the deal. I will fund every penny to run that race car. And whatever that race car raises in funding and also awareness is going to benefit Make-A-Wish. Then she got wind of Infinite Hero. And in 2014, her and Don Schumacher said, you know what, let's split the costs. We'll try 6 races with this and see what we think. And it was so successful. She said, I want to do this too. Terry passed away from glioblastoma. It's the same brain cancer that killed John McCain. It is underfunded, rare, and nearly always fatal right now. Her husband, Doug, is not a big drag race guy. But Doug's realized that, while Terry was doing all these things to change the veterans' lives and the sick children and their families' lives, drag racing was also changing her life for the better. He says, I'm going to continue funding these cars for 3 years in her honor. And when we came to Houston, it was real natural because she went to MD Anderson when she was diagnosed. And they took such good care of her. By the way, MD Anderson also treated Don Schumacher when he had neck and throat cancer, and he's alive today because of that. So my car owner was treated wonderfully there, and unfortunately she didn't make it. My team owner was treated wonderfully there, and he did make it. So we thought doing MD Anderson for this race would be a good chance to pay back what they did for us and pay it forward. And what I did not realize, because I am also a cancer survivor, I had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I have been in remission for 14 years now. What I didn't realize is how many fans were going to come up to me and tell me that they were patients or had been or were caring for somebody who was a patient at MD Anderson. And it made them feel like they were part of our race team. And I truly wasn't expecting that. So it was a serendipitous chance to touch some other lives. We're already doing great things for the injured vets, but to also do it for a world-class facility and for the cancer patients, obviously was near and dear to my heart. And with cancer, I went through it, but the toughest thing I've done in my life was watching my mom die from it. So if we can do some things and get some funding out there, so 10 years down the road, people don't have to die from this, that's pretty special.
Amen to that, man. And if there's anything we can do to push any programs or get people connected with those programs, let us know offline, and we'll keep.
You know what? Here's what I tell people on charities. Only because I read this a few years ago and I thought it was brilliant. To raise money for some sort of charity, you better be incredibly passionate about it, because I don't know who made fundraiser start with the word fun. There is no fun in doing fundraisers. I've done plenty of them, and it's a lot of work. So when you're on the other end of that and you're going to be a donor, you don't have to send $20 to 500 charities. Pick 1 or 2 or 3 that means something to you. Could be cancer research, could be a lung deal, it could be COPD, could be diabetes, could be epilepsy. Pick a few and donate what you can to those. And if people stick with that, they're going to fund the things closest to their heart that make a difference. And given $10 or $20 or $50 is not going to seem like that big a deal. Because at the end of the day, this is going to sound odd the way I say it, but money is going to cure cancer. Because if you can get enough funding to do grants for research and start thinking outside the box on some of these things, we're going to find additional treatments. We're going to find preventive measures, just the same way we're treating the PTS for these soldiers here. We're going to find some new things that work better than past treatments.
It's that longitudinal investment effort, commitment, and this has been awesome to see. It's interesting. You mentioned about Don Schumacher. He went through that. I lost my father to pancreatic cancer, so I understand. Tony Schumacher is not in a car this year. That says something about where we are with the sport and all of that. Is that something you can talk to a little bit as we look at the Melanie Troxels and the Dixons and some of the other truly great drivers that we've seen over time who aren't in rides right now? Where are we with the sport, and what has to happen to kind of address that and make the whole thing go forward in your view?
Well, okay, so in 1984. At one race, 12 top fuel cars showed up, and the headlines were drag racing's dead, right? Then Garlits comes out of retirement for the 5th time, and I think we can all agree, if you follow drag racing since 1984, Top Fuel has had some unbelievable success. But I think like anything, there's an ebb and a flow. Drag racing as a whole weathered the recession 10 years ago pretty remarkably. And maybe we're just seeing on the backside of that a little of the repercussions. Tony Schumacher had the U.S. Army on the side of his car for 19 years. That car was funded with one purpose in mind: to recruit soldiers. Don read an article in the Wall Street Journal on the average amount of money it took to take a kid and put him in boots to send off to basic training or boot camp. And he thought, I think I can do this cheaper for them. In other words, the amount of money the Army spends on recruiting divided by the number of people that enlist in the Army that year is how much money it costs to put each person in for the recruiting budget. And the Army Top Fuel team was so wildly successful that, if you recall, the government stepped in, 5-6 years ago and said the U.S. Army tax dollars can't be involved in any motorsports. They dropped the whole NASCAR program. You notice they didn't drop Top Fuel? Because Don went to him and showed him the numbers. And they said, holy Jesus, we're saving money being on the Top Fuel team. Well, think about the recruiting needs in the last 19 years. We've wound down the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars. We don't need as many people in boots. We knew that program was going to sunset eventually. We just knew it, because now they go start crossing off the bigger line items revolved around recruiting once those needs go down. The problem is sometimes you can find a sponsor in a month. Sometimes it takes 3 years to get somebody knowledgeable enough on our sport and the benefits that it offers for the investment for the company. And they've had several that we thought were going to sign. And for one reason or another, until that check clears, nothing's ever official. And you ask any racer, and it's probably happened to them a half a dozen times. Somebody says, yes, we're going to do this. And then as it goes up the chain or to their board, something delays it 6 months. Something puts it on the back burner. CEOs change and their missions change. So it's not a good thing that the sport's winningest Top Fuel driver doesn't have a ride. That's going to change, and I think sooner rather than later, and they'll be back out there contending again. But I just think it underscores that you can't ever rest on your laurels in this sport. There's not a lot of job security being a nitro driver. You mentioned it yourself. You got people like Melanie Troxel, and I could name half a dozen others that are perfectly qualified to come out tomorrow and drive these cars. There's not enough cars for the potential drivers there. And the same as in NASCAR and every other level of motorsports where the driver's getting a salary for doing that. So I don't think it'd be prophetic of me to say that Tony Schumacher.
Oh man!
For those who
We dropped him
are
again.
familiar with our podcast, please take a drink as we experience another
Take a drink. Time to
silence.
take a drink. It's only had a couple of them tonight, though.
Yeah, so Drax,
Has this
good.
been about the most epic podcast ever?
Pretty much.
Hopefully
Yeah.
Jack's phone reconnects here pretty quickly.
Yeah. Did it actually drop him?
He's still on the
he's still
participant
there.
list.
He's still there.
Yeah,
Just
Yeah, Jack,
have
we'll
lost
wait
him.
patiently.
Yeah, we'll wait patiently.
Worst case, drop the meeting, dial back in. Sometimes that.
I got you guys now.
You're back.
There you
Okay.
go. We got you back. You're back.
Yeah.
Yeah, you live in an area where the cell phone contention is really high at certain times
Yep.
of the day,
And it's gonna kick
that's
you
just
around.
it's just how it is. So
I swear I didn't move, guys. I was
worst
always
case, switch your
perfectly
phone over to
still.
Wi-Fi.
it's not you. It's not
Where
you.
are you
can-
calling from? Where is he at? Is he out in Southern California?
Yeah, correct. I live in Norco, named after.
Yep.
Actually, the painkiller was named after the town.
Yeah, you
my
can
God.
you can switch with the app we use. You can actually switch from phone usage to Wi-Fi in the middle of it, and it'll pick it right back up. So it doesn't kick you off the meter. or
Yeah,
anything.
either way.
Jack,
we're
Jack
about
is
out of
in
time
an interesting
anyhow.
Part of the world where he's in horsey property up on the hill in Norco,
Yep.
and
Oh, so those
up
horses
there,
using their phones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, so what's interesting about that is you heard Jack mention about the constraints on the size of the garage that he can work. So you saw the lift and that it can go 39 inches off the floor. And you're thinking, okay, that's interesting. So he was able to construct a separate building, but it had to be in a spot where it had to be something that normally would support horses, not race cars. And so having a race car driver there is he's looked at askance for that. So welcome to California once again.
Yeah, none of that even computes to me.
Yeah, I know. It sounds crazy, doesn't it?
So do you guys want to get? Yeah, I'll get off on a political rant again. But is anybody keeping track of Bill's vocabulary in this conversation? I am definitely learning a lot of things here.
Oh, Lord.
He's got to lawyer it up to a lot of people, and he has to learn fancy words sometimes.
He might be
We
the
have
most
to-
intelligent guy I know.
Oh, stop that.
You're worried about politics here, but we piss off enough people. We got to have a full-time lawyer on here. So let's leave it at that. Oh, love it.
Sometimes I get to be part of the pissing, and sometimes I get part of be putting out the fire. So
Right.
Yes.
It all
We
goes
love him
back
for
and
that.
forth.
Don't get me wrong. That's why Bill gets free tuning for life. But
God.
it's
Which is
funny.
also why
Well, that's
everyone's amused about me being seen as a technical resource, because most of our focus here is on EFI tuning, at which I'm not quite so good.
Oh, you're good at it. Don't say that. That's not true.
But anyway, so we're coming up on the end of our second hour. This is
Better let this guy go. He's a hero
Yeah.
already.
Jack,
Hey, he told me as
have-
long as the dinner bell didn't call, he was good to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I keep looking outside the door. Nobody's yelling at me yet.
Oh, this
They're probably
this
all
will
listening.
go down one of our
No, they're probably all
legendary
eating.
episodes. Yeah. Yeah, they've eaten already.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the best episodes, Jack. We can't thank you enough for
Well, hey,
especially information
you know what, guys?
about
I'll
tuning.
make this offer because this was very interesting to me too. If we want to continue this on, and maybe you guys can get some more specific questions from some of the listeners, because a lot of times, I'll give you an example. If I go to a lot of races, they'll say, "Hey, can you go up to the Napa Suite and sign autographs for those people?" And they can come to my pits and get an autograph, for God's sake. That's not a big deal. I want to go up there when a different category is running and let them ask me all kinds of questions about racing and help them become better fans by understanding the nuances of our sport better. So like a lot of your listeners are obviously going to be more technically oriented people, but maybe not per se on nitromethane. So if you guys want to have us follow up to this, get me a list of questions from the listeners. We'll dive right back into it.
We could do a live remote, at one of the events and go in and walk through it and, have you on the right end of the lens and the microphone jack and feed the questions. That would be a very cool episode.
Do we want to do a couple of listener questions before we go?
Yeah, sure. I'm fine with that. But hey, just so you guys know, I am doubling my fee for next episode. Okay, so 0 times 2.
So free 99 times 2.
Get back to me.
That's free
All right,
188.
I'll send you a 28-page document to sign.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say he knows how to turn 2 times 0 into a real number. Be careful.
That's lawyer math.
Right. Yes.
So one of our listeners wants to know: do you use nitro percentage as a tuning tool?
Yeah, and here's the thing. I think, and this might sound stupid, but if I told you guys if you wanted a crew chief for a super comp car, I think I'd be phenomenal. But there's a lot of things to know to run a super comp car. There really is. And on a nitro car, I understand how to put it into words for the fans to relate to it, but my brain doesn't think like nitro crew chiefs. There's just so many levels to this. So there's 3 ways to make power: compression, supercharger overdrive, and nitro percentage. And what we do is we try to arrive at a tune-up number, which is why if you go to a drag race and it's 2.5 hours before the nitro cars are scheduled to run, nobody's got cylinder heads on their engine. We're monitoring the weather. We want to see what the density altitude is going to be, and then we're going to put the right thickness head gaskets on to get the compression ratio. So as you can imagine, there's a give and take with all 3. If you were to raise the blower speed, you would have a more efficient blower revving up. But when the thing's at max RPM and the tips of the rotors are past supersonic, it's going to create more heat, and it's maybe not going to be as efficient. Okay, if you raise the compression ratio up, the thing's going to be real snappy, but you actually have less cylinder volume with the piston at top dead center to take in that boost and fuel volume. If you raise the nitro percentage, it tends to make, and I hope I'm not misstating this because I ask a lot of smart crew chiefs and the problem is I don't remember all the time. It will make more torque that way, but we can only run 90% maximum. The other 10% plus is methyl alcohol or methanol. What the methanol does is a wonderful job of suppressing potential detonation with nitromethane. So when you get higher on the nitromethane percentage, it gets harder on the parts. It squishes the rod bearings more. It dishes the tops of pistons more. Think of the nitro being the dynamite that goes off, and the blower and the compression ratio being the amount of potential push you can get from that, if that makes sense.
One of the
that makes total sense.
One of the things that I found was a great story that I got to witness was the nitro itself. You can put a little puddle on a table, and you can try to light it all day long, and it just won't catch. It doesn't want to catch on fire without compression, without some force behind it. But if you take a ball-peen hammer and you smack that puddle of nitro, it'll throw that hammer out of your hand mile high in the sky from the force of it just exploding under the pressure.
Oh, guys, there's some unbelievable stories. One of the ones that happened is guys will sometimes change out the head studs. Okay, so the head studs have a hex cut in the top of them so you can thread them down into the block. And the guy's threading the new one in with an impact. What he didn't realize is that nitro had gone down into the hole. When he compressed that down there was no ignition. It literally was just through compression. It shot that thing through the side of the trailer.
Wow.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff.
So let me guess, they're careful to keep nitro out of the head bolt bosses now.
Well, like if we start the engine up, and have to shut it down for any reason, we will take the fuel lines off the back of the heads. We will blow air through everything. We will do everything in our power to make sure we've purged everything out of the cylinders. That's why we will often, when they talk about backing the engine down, all it means is using a breaker bar and rotating the engine the opposite rotation. So it can't build compression because now the intake and exhaust timing is backwards. So you can't build compression. What you're trying to do is evacuate the cylinders out of any of that nitromethane, because just the compression could ignite it.
Oh, so it's even more fun than we thought.
We're real careful. No, sometimes you'll hear a torque wrench land on top of somebody's trailer, and don't look at the guy next to you. It's the pits 5 down where they're backing that thing down, and that thing took off because they didn't back it down. They turned it the wrong way.
Oh, wow.
Mark, do we have some other questions keyed up? Go ahead.
Let's see here. Ron Brown asked, he said,
go ahead.
Ron Brown asked, he heard at the finish line there will be a line that injects lube before the supercharger.
Yeah, so when you see cars lift off the throttle at the finish line and you see a whole bunch of smoke come out the pipes, historically what that's been is the compression has started to tighten up the top ringland on the piston. In other words, the heat is starting to micro-weld the ring to the piston, which is okay when there's pressure going on top of it. But the minute you lift off the throttle and there's no more pressure, the oil gets sucked past the piston, out the exhaust valve, and you see a bunch of smoke come out. Now, the last couple years, if you see us lift and 100 feet past the finish line, you see a little puff of white smoke come out. Typically, we control the blower lube on a timer. It's a small little accumulator that holds about a half a pint. It's bolted behind the injector, and it's exactly what it is. It's a sticky blower lube. When I lift off the throttle, a lot of times those sealing strips on the supercharger are getting warm, and they will smear, and we'll have to change them before it's really time. If we inject that blower lube in there, it cools them off, takes the friction away, and it'll keep the blower better longer.
Yeah, I was always told it was for blower reasons to make it last.
Yeah, we can change.
Tom Vigio adds that it was also the exhaust valves are so hot they're actually glowing, and it helps cool the exhaust valves and helps keep them from sagging.
Well, first off, how do we know they're glowing? Because the only idea we'd have on temperature would be the exhaust gas.
He said, do you know Tommy DeLago?
Sure.
Yeah, he said he learned that from him.
Well, Tommy DeLago is about as smart as they come, but our exhaust valves are Inconel. So, I mean, maybe that's true. Maybe they were having a problem tuliping their valves, and that was enough to help out.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think we'll have a lot of fun with having a technical thread on the conversation because, Jack, you were able to, here we go, elucidate a lot of topics here that I think a lot of people have wanted to know about or didn't really understand, because you're just not going to get that from watching a car that has this visceral impact. You sort of forget your name when the thing, when it makes a hit.
They sure as hell don't explain it on TV.
No,
The problem with the TV coverage is 80% of the viewers don't want to know this sort of stuff. They're a little more cursory. They want the high impact. They want the visual stuff. They want the numbers. If you get too technical, you're going to alienate a good portion of your fans. And it's a real fine balance between dumbing it down so much that the tech guys don't get what they want and talking over too many people's heads. I'd rather, I think one of the smartest moves NHRA has made in the last 10 years is the Nitro School that they do on Saturday with Alan Reinhart. Alan Reinhart is not only absolutely a world-class announcer,
Yep.
Yeah, but he's a brilliant mechanic, and he has a phenomenal way
to the races.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're educating our fans, 400 people at a time, into the nuances behind the scenes there. Now they become better fans because when they watch a run, they pick up so many more details than before they understood it.
You know, one of the things we talk to a lot of guys that do no prep racing, which I'm sure you've heard of by now, and because that's been very, very popular. One of our guys on here was asking, hey, how do you feel about that? You know, is it something you're familiar with? Do you watch it? Do you enjoy it? We see it a lot because we deal with it a lot.
Here's the deal. I think we all know, gosh, I hate to be a spoiler here, the Street Outlaws is not done in a clandestine way on TV. All that stuff is a parade permit that's issued. They bring in lighting stands, and it's about as controlled an environment as you can have on the street. The problem that I have with that, I don't know if you watched one of them, but a guy rolled his car, and the only thing that kept him from going into a tree on the side of the street was they parked an SUV in front of it, so he totaled someone else's SUV. The reason drag strips have barriers on both sides is to keep you on the racing surface, minimize damage to you, and minimize a chance of a spectator getting hurt. I am 100% for the quote-unquote no prep stuff because it's done in a controlled environment on a drag strip. And it's kind of bitching to watch how fast some of these guys go, what different power adders they use. And I'm not, here's the thing. You can't do a no prep. Let's say you take Pomona. Okay, it tends to be a little bit windy out there. It's dusty. You couldn't go 11 seconds on Pomona drag strip without some prep. What they mean by no prep is we don't spray a bunch of VHT traction compound or PJ1 traction compound on the track, but we've got to prep the track to get it clean before the cars run. It doesn't have the same amount of glue that it would for an NHRA national event.
Yeah, we could talk a lot about what is no prep and all of this. I think you make a key point, Jack, when you talk about anybody who pays any attention to watching a Street Outlaws taping understands that it's a semi-artificial environment. We could have a long conversation about that. This probably isn't the time for it, but it's a fundamentally different thing because it's a TV show. So, first, last, and always, it's a TV show. There are directors, things are run, things are managed, things are handled. We should maybe make a lot of friends and not so many friends by having a real frank discussion about that sometime. But in the meantime, I think the cool thing about what NHRA does is NHRA has rules. I can only imagine how fast a Funnycar would be if you said, oh, hey, next year, we're not going to have any rules.
Run what you brung.
Go as fast as you think you could make it go. I don't even know what that would look like.
Well, I can give you a good idea, I think. In 2006, I set the still standing speed record for the quarter mile at 333 miles an hour. Robert Height holds it at 1,000 foot at 339 miles an hour. Robert Height's car weighed 170 pounds more than my car weighed when I did it in 2006. Wow. Robert Height's car now has way better cylinder heads, way better camshaft, way better supercharger. So that time slip I sent you where I went 288 to half track, when I set the national record, I went 271 to half track. So I'm already 17 miles an hour faster there. Now, if you extrapolate, that's 350. However, you're going to have a point of diminishing returns because you're going to stack the wind up in front of the car more. However, there's a lot of better parts there. There's no reason to think it can't run a backdoor about the same. The issue would be, do we have a long enough fuse? If you ran a car to the quarter mile, would it survive? Now, obviously, you're also be talking about turning the rev limiters off the cars and let them run out the back door. There's two racetracks, Gainesville and Phoenix, that have shutdown areas long enough where I think the drivers would be comfortable doing that. But you're never going to go back there because we have no data for that. You know, our goal right now is to make them as fast as they possibly can be, and we've got a fuse long enough that the motor will survive to 1,040 feet, right, if you don't lift right at the finish line. It's not going to go 1,320 feet with the present-day tune-up. We'd run the fuel tank dry.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, and those are incremental changes.
Do you think though, if they actually said, "Hey, no rules, do what you want," do you think it would evolve in a way that people would go, "Oh, we need more fuel. Oh, we need different things. Oh, we need to do this to make it last longer. We need to." Do you think it would like if they just said, "We don't care what cubic inch motor you run, just run whatever," right? And you could you could do whatever you want to run a bigger blower, run whatever.
I think history answers your question, because actually there's almost always been rules since NHRA was formed. Really, you can't say top fuel was top fuel until, well, they lifted the nitro ban in 63. So 64 AA fuel dragsters, AAFD was the designation. So let's say they started calling them top fuel in 1965. Well, at that time, they already started having rules, but not like they do now. Guys ran Oldsmobiles, guys ran 392s, guys ran 426s. Some guys had small block Chevys blown on nitro. And so things were a lot more wide open then. And then what happens is somebody zeroes in on a pretty optimal combination. And eventually that was the 417 Donovan for the 392 style Hemis. And then the Keith Blacks and the later derivatives for the 426 Hemis. And then eventually the 426 models just proved better. And what happens, you just see, as you get towards the top of the pyramid, the diversity goes away. You know, the paradigm for making great consistent horsepower, kind of narrows itself down there. And then the, oh gosh, what was that? The McGee, the quad cam motor comes out, and you're like, wow, is this going to be the next big step? And then NHRA stepped in and said, okay, here's the deal. Single camshaft, it's got to be a push rod motor. And I see both sides of that argument. You know, did you stymie ingenuity? Yeah. Did you save a lot of people hundreds of thousands of dollars? Yeah. So it's at some point, well, Tony Schumacher doesn't have a ride because that style of car takes about $3.2 million a year to run for a championship. Now, if it only took $400,000 a year to run for a championship because the cars were way, way slower, you'd see many more cars out here. So again, as you get closer to the top of that pyramid, less people can afford to do this.
Which becomes the total value proposition, whether it's the kind of work the Chandlers are doing with Infinite Hero and what they're trying to accomplish, and what Don Schumacher was looking to do for the Army when it was recruitment. These are very big picture things, way beyond, you know, an individual thing about nitro percentages or in exhaust valve size or any of those type of things. So this is why the answer is always, it's complicated, right?
Right. And there's 5 defensible right positions on here. Ultimately, we have to have a sport that's viable enough to attract fans. Now, you're attracting fans in 2 different areas: on-site in person and tuned into television. And that's going to give the value to our sport to go to potential sponsors and say, here's what we can offer you, and here's what we think that warrants for your financial commitment. Well, guess what? If we can get them to pay because they know it's a return on investment, if they pay as much as it costs to run the car for a season, you'll see more cars out there competing all season long. But let me tell you, the toughest thing in any sport, I think, isn't to compete. It's to find funding to be able to go out and compete.
Interesting. Like maybe that's as hard or harder than the actual competition itself. It's just getting yourself there. It takes a lot of work.
Well, I think Kenny, I think Kenny Bernstein was the greatest example of that. There was a guy that was a decent fuel racer with a passion that became a great businessman and came back to be one of the greatest fuel racers of all time because he was a great businessman.
Kenny has an amazing house about 4 blocks from my house. And yeah,
The one in Corona Del Mar.
Guys,
The Corona Del Mar house. Yeah.
Hey, what Bill just said is Bill is loaded. That's what he just told us,
No,
you
Bill
guys.
did not say that. Bill did not say that.
Bill built his car in his little tiny 1-car garage, though. I got to give him credit, man. It's pretty awesome. And it's funny, his drag week car, I've been out to Bill's. Well, before Bill became good at doing EFI himself, I used to get to go out to his place once a year and get him ready for drag week. And the greatest thing about going to Bill's, not all the tuning. I mean, riding around in some bitchin' cars is fun, but he built this car in this little tiny 1-car garage. And the car's won, it's drag week class twice, I think, or 3 times. The first Mustang times. Twice. Yeah. Couple times. Well, and the greatest thing about Bill's is the procedure for getting the car out to go street testing. It is street legal, but you can't run that thing more than 8 seconds without the cops showing up on his block, right?
Well, that's what Bernstein called him.
Right. Well, so passengers got to slam the garage door shut. Bill hauls ass down the back alleyway, and then passenger has to run out to the front. Bill will catch you on the front of the street, and man, that's your only chance to get a ride. And then you are off down Pacific Coast Highway. And then you got to call, the wife calls, and she's like, yeah, cops have made like 4 laps around the property looking for you. You got to wait till the cops give up. Sneak back in. He'll drop you around the front. You haul ass around back and meet him, open the garage door. He wheels it in real quick. You slam the garage door shut everything off, and then you stay real quiet for 15 minutes.
You need a pace car like a couple blocks away that you can just drive up quietly to deal with opening the garage door and stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the cops have already figured out that you're listening on the scanner, but so hilarious to race that stink in Corona Del Mar.
So where I live, I've actually been pulled over by the police because they wanted to ask about my car.
Check it out.
Yeah, they wanted to ask about the car, what kind it was. They had never seen it before.
Right.
Yeah, that's always a good sign when the police guy is a car guy.
Oh yeah. And most of them are around here too. I worked with Larry Larson a bunch, and he's got his local policeman there in Oak Grove, Missouri, is a car guy as well, and has actually been to one of our EFI classes, Josh, and super cool guy, takes care of everybody around there. And total car guy. It's so funny. I remember the first time I met him, I'm like, oh no, Larry, cop just rolled up. He's like, oh no, that's Josh. Don't worry about it. He's cool, man.
Yeah,
He's totally
that.
Cool.
Yeah,
car guy.
I'll take him for a ride in the truck. Hey, the dinner bell just went off. How about that?
Oh, very good.
Oh,
that's good.
timing.
We need to wrap it up anyway.
Yeah. Are we good on are we good on listeners' questions? Have we covered out all of them?
We're good for now. We'll get you another week.
Back in a two.
We're going to take you up on the follow-up because
Scott.
Yep.
Yeah, Scott or Bill, just reach out. I'm good for it. I enjoyed our time, guys.
Thank you so much, Jack.
Yeah,
all
best
right,
show ever.
Hey, wait till you get the invoice.
No problem.
Yeah,
we'll send it right to Bill.
I'll work it off in your pitch. Just get me a job.
I was going to say, I'll come for you. I'll get the EFI running when when that car starts to frustrate you. Just give us a call, man.
Perfect. That's a good trade. All right, we'll see you boys for part 2 then.
Thanks, boss. We'll talk to you.
If you can hang out for a couple minutes, we'll talk to you for just a minute after. If not, we understand. Go eat.
Yep. Go eat, and we'll catch up with you later.
Take care, guys.
Cool.
Thanks.
Cool.
All right. Nice. That was badass. I don't even know what to say. That was super cool. Holy crap. That might have been our best episode ever. Real close. The top 2 or 3 for sure. Holy crap. Man, the tuning info he gave out in the first 45 minutes. I mean, there wasn't a question to answer. Dude, I've been waiting since I was 9-10 years old to understand how this stuff, what the hell is really going on there. I'm tired of reading the same crap over and over, the 3 or 4 things they talk about with top fuel tuning, but and this guy knows how to process.
The guys that we help out in pro stuff, little tidbits and stuff, but then they're like, that's all we know. And then
they don't know. None of the guys I worked with knew any of half of how that stuff worked. Clutches and the routing and all. But anyway, so that was cool.
That he knows a lot more than what we touched on tonight.
Oh God, I can't even imagine. But he instructs drag racers, fundraising for charities, just super badass. I don't, I feel like not so accomplished sometimes, but that guy just gets me pumped up, man.
I've been a fan of Jack for a long time because of the whole Infinite Hero thing and the fundraising and the helping out others. And when I walked up to him at the track, I wasn't expecting anything. I just was walking up to shake his hand and say, "Hey, man, love."
You just go.
I didn't go up for an autograph. I didn't go up for, I just said, "Hey," I walked up and said, "Really love you as a driver. Really like what you guys are doing with the organization. I work on a podcast. Love to have you on if we can get you." And he was like, "Yeah, cool. Let's talk about it a second. Here's my email.
I remember when you told me that you were still at the track.
Yeah, he was totally cool about it. And he was just like, "Yeah, here's the info. Send me an email." I got home. I sent it right away. I was like, I'm home. Within 5 minutes, I sent that email and said, "Hey, I'm the guy I talked to you today. I want to make sure it's fresh in your mind. Here you go. Here's the thing. If you're interested, let me know. Here's some links to some previous episodes so you can check it out." And he responded like the next morning. Was like, "Hey, this sounds great. Let's do it."
That's crazy. I couldn't believe it either. I'm like, "What? Really?" Yeah, that was super bad.
Pretty much thought Evans was pulling my leg.
Yeah, same here. I was like, bullshit. He's not going to get that guy in here. And then Fowler was like, "No, I've met him. I know him."
Bill's like, Bill's like, "I know him. I'm helping him with his El Camino a little bit." I'm like, "What?"
Right.
Yeah, and Jack, anytime you need help, I'm not that far away. I'll gladly come out there to California and help you.
I was going to say he's going to be calling for help here in about 3 days.
Yep, I'm not far away. I can make that trip pretty easy.
Yeah, you're a few hour drive.
I tried to have a gentle conversation about that. And, it was one of the things, obviously, when you do what he does at that level, lots of people want to be involved. I mean, he was essentially a cold call into Bear. And they said, "Oh, this guy." And it's like, "That's Jack Beckman who just called. Are you freaking kidding me?"
Yeah.
So it was
right.
Yeah. I'm just like, the rest of you, I've been a fan for a very long time. I love people who do something like that at the top of their sport, but then to do the give back thing, the stuff involved, Cancer Survivor, the other stuff, it's somebody I respected enormously from a distance,
off the chain.
And when something came up, it's like, we help out a little bit with brakes? It's like, duh, so yeah.
Actually, it's pretty cool, the vigor with which he's into the El Camino, man. That was the original car back in the family. That's keeping it in the family. That's cool. I mean, that was a cool story too. Yeah, I have a whole new apprieciation for top fuel tuning because it ain't nearly as dumb as people think it is.
Yeah, I think we had to check some, things at the door on that.
Right. Right. Yeah. New respect there. Now I kind of want to go back to mechanical fuel injection tuning. That was super badass.
Yeah, so Jack has put his heart and soul into that car. I mean, I've been out to the garage multiple times and just seen the step by step, and it's like any of us building a car in our one car garage. That's the deal. So
right,
prettier than mine, but it is what it is. So there's that side of it, and then there's all the other pieces, and he's got a daughter that's doing cool things, and his son is into hockey, and all the other things that happen with being parents and all that stuff. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And Tom Bigby was talking about Terry, which it's tricky to work those in, but you think about what the history and how small a family that kind of racing is, and how those things came around. I'm looking at Tom's post here about Tommy the Lago is out of work right now. I mean, that's what's so bizarre. I mean, the sport is a very narrow thing based on, what people can get done. And yet the good news is they're selling at events. And oddly enough, the Street Outlaws probably has something to do with that. So we could certainly have a drag racing political show. I'm not sure how that would go, but we could.
I got a lot of my start with the Street Outlaws. Yeah, I mean, I got my start with them when it was legit on the streets, and I mean, it's still legit on the streets. And I think those guys for the business that keeps me going every day. So
yeah,
it's just another different facet of the industry. But we should wrap this up, man. This is the longest show we've done in basically ever.
Awesome.
That's all I got to say, man. If you want to go back and listen to the beginning, if you want to catch the class schedule, or go back to RealTuners.com. We got one coming up this weekend after Easter at Blake Hughes' shop. Check that out. 2 weeks after that, we're going to be at James Short shop at Shore Tuning. Definitely come to that one. We just announced that one like a week ago, and so there's plenty of seats left for that one. James's shop's a good place. But get us out of here. Take us away, Scott Evans, man. I appreciate the engineering work tonight, and everybody else. Thanks for listening in. Good work, and we will talk to you guys in a week. Peace out.
Do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes. When are they, you might ask? March 30th and 31st, late model Dodge and Mopar factory ECU tuning with Rick Tapp in Dallas, Fort Worth. April 27th and 28th, an advanced class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. May 18th and 19th, a standalone EFI Level 1 class at 417 Motorsports in Springfield, Missouri. June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info. And remember, don't forget to have your host spayed or neutered.